Clara Moreau found her fiancé in bed with her cousin 4 hours before their wedding, and she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't cancel. Instead, she walked calmly to her dressing room, locked the door, and made a single phone call that would destroy the most powerful mafia boss in New York. Because Clara had a secret, she'd been planning this day for 6 months. And Victor Rinaldi was about to discover that the woman he thought he owned had already chosen another man to stand beside her at the altar. If you're ready to witness the most explosive wedding ceremony in mafia history, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Clara's story travels across the world. The Baccarat chandelier in the bridal suite cast fractured light across $200,000 worth of imported Italian lace, but Clara Moreau couldn't feel the weight of her wedding dress anymore. She couldn't feel anything except the absolute clarity that came from watching her entire future shatter into something she could finally control. The door to Victor's private room stood half open down the hallway. She'd come looking for him to discuss a last-minute change to the seating arrangements, his mother's dietary restrictions, something trivial that seemed important an hour ago. Now she stood frozen 15 feet away, her hand still raised from the knock that never landed, watching her cousin Gabrielle's red dress pool on the floor beside Victor's discarded shirt. The sounds were unmistakable. Gabrielle's laugh, breathy and triumphant. Victor's voice, rough with pleasure, murmuring things he'd never said to Clara in their 18 months together. Clara's first instinct was to look away. Her second was to scream. Her third, the one that crystallized into diamond-hard certainty, was to memorize every detail. The antique clock in the hallway, 2:47 p.m. ceremony at 6 o'clock, the lipstick stain on the champagne glass abandoned on the hall table, Gabrielle's shade, rouge fatale, the way Victor's hand tangled in Gabrielle's dark hair, the same way he'd touched Clara last night while telling her how lucky she was to become Mrs. Rinaldi. Clara pulled her phone from the hidden pocket she'd had sewn into every dress she'd worn for the past 6 months, a habit Ethan had taught her, along with so many other small rebellions, and took 3 photographs. The angle was perfect. The door frame, Victor's profile, Gabrielle's distinctive tattoo visible on her shoulder. Undeniable. Then she walked away. Her heels made no sound on the thick carpet. Her breathing stayed even. Her hands didn't shake until she reached her dressing room and locked the door behind her. And even then, it wasn't fear that made her fingers tremble. It was rage so pure it felt like electricity in her veins. She looked at herself in the mirror, the dress Victor had chosen, the jewelry his mother had insisted upon, the hairstyle his sister had approved. Even the shade of her lipstick had been selected by Victor's aesthetic consultant to complement his tuxedo. She looked like a beautiful stranger. "Clara," her maid of honor's voice came through the door, tentative and worried. "Everything okay? You've been gone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Had it really been that long since she'd left to find Victor? Time felt elastic, stretched between the woman who'd walked out of this room and the one who'd returned. "I'm fine, Rachel. Just need a moment. The photographer wants to start the getting ready shots in 10 minutes. Tell him 15. She waited until Rachel's footsteps faded, then pulled out her phone. Not the iPhone Victor had given her, monitored and tracked, but the burner Ethan had provided 3 weeks ago. She scrolled to the only contact saved. Found him with Gabrielle. 4 hours until ceremony. Everything changes now. The response came in seconds. "I'm ready." "Are you?" Clara looked at the photograph she'd taken, then at her reflection, then at the wedding dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. Victor had paid for all of it. Victor controlled all of it. Victor owned everything in this room except the one thing that mattered. Her choice. "More than ready," she typed. "Let's burn it all down." She deleted the message thread, powered off the burner, and hid it back in her undergarments drawer beneath the lingerie Victor had selected for their wedding night. Then she sat down at her vanity and began the careful work of transforming her face into a mask of bridal joy. By the time Rachel knocked again, Clara was smiling. The next 3 hours unfolded like a fever dream wrapped in champagne and camera flashes. Rachel and the other bridesmaids fluttered around her, adjusting her veil, touching up her makeup, exclaiming over how radiant she looked. Clara smiled and nodded and said all the right things while her mind cataloged every detail of the plan she and Ethan had spent 6 months perfecting. The guests arriving downstairs. 400 people, half of them Victor's business associates, the other half social connections too prestigious to refuse. Every major family in New York's underground power structure. Federal agents embedded among the catering staff, cameras positioned to capture every angle, the evidence already compiled. Financial records tracing Victor's money laundering operations. Testimony from 3 insiders Ethan had helped relocate. Documentation of bribes, threats, and violence spanning 7 years. All of it sealed and ready to be released the moment Clara gave the signal. The marriage certificate, the real one, not the elaborate document Victor would sign at the altar. Clara had signed it yesterday in a lawyer's office with Ethan standing beside her, making their union legal 12 hours before Victor would even realize he'd lost. "Your father's ready," Rachel said softly, squeezing Clara's hand. "Are you nervous?" Clara met her friend's eyes in the mirror. Rachel knew nothing about the plan. Neither did any of the bridesmaids, or Clara's parents, or anyone except the small circle of people who'd helped make this possible. It was safer that way. Victor had eyes everywhere. "Not nervous," Clara said, and it was true. "Just ready for everything to change." Rachel smiled, misunderstanding completely. "You're going to be so happy, Clara. I know Victor seems intense, but he loves you. Anyone can see that." Love. The word tasted like ash in Clara's mouth. Victor didn't love her. Victor loved possession, control. The image of having the senator's daughter on his arm, the political connections her family brought, the respectability her name provided for his empire of violence and corruption. He'd told her as much, in the early days when he'd still bothered with honesty. "You're perfect for me, Clara. Beautiful, educated, connected. You'll make an excellent wife. I'll give you everything you could want. Clothes, jewelry, houses. All you have to do is be mine." She'd been flattered then, naive enough to think his intensity meant passion, sheltered enough to mistake his control for protection. That was before she understood what being his really meant, before the tracking devices in her car, before the monitoring software on her phone, before the casual threats disguised as concern, the isolation disguised as devotion, the cage disguised as luxury. Before Ethan Blackwell looked at her across a catering consultation meeting and somehow saw through every careful smile to the desperation underneath. 5 minutes, someone called from the doorway. Clara stood, and 6 women rushed forward to arrange her train, her veil, her bouquet of white roses that Victor had insisted upon despite Clara preferring peonies. She let them fuss, let them perfect the image of the blushing bride, while inside she felt nothing but ice-cold determination. Her father appeared in the doorway, distinguished in his tuxedo, his eyes already suspiciously bright. Senator James Moreau, 3-term representative from New York, progressive champion, crusader for justice. He had no idea he was about to walk his daughter down the aisle to a man who'd orchestrated the murder of a rival family head just 6 weeks ago. Clara had wanted to tell him, had drafted the conversation a dozen times, but her father was too honest, too transparent. He'd never be able to hide his knowledge from Victor, and Victor would know someone had talked. The risk was too great. After today, she'd tell him everything. After today, when it wouldn't matter anymore what Victor knew. "You look so beautiful, sweetheart." Her father's voice cracked as he offered his arm. "Your mother would have been so proud." Clara's mother had died when she was 16, too soon to warn her about men like Victor Rinaldi, too soon to teach her that sometimes the most dangerous predators wore custom suits and quoted poetry. "I wish she could be here," Clara said softly, and meant it. Her mother would have seen through Victor immediately, would have asked the questions Clara had been too dazzled to consider, would have protected her daughter from ever needing to plan something as desperate and dangerous as what was about to unfold. The music started. Wagner's bridal chorus, traditional and expected. Clara took her father's arm and let him lead her toward the grand staircase. The estate was magnificent. Victor's family home, a sprawling mansion in the Hamptons that spoke of old money and older power. The ceremony would take place in the garden, beneath an arch of white roses and crystal, with the ocean providing a dramatic backdrop. 500 chairs arranged in perfect rows, a string quartet playing, champagne waiting for the reception. every detail orchestrated by Victor to demonstrate his wealth, his taste, his power. Every detail about to become evidence. Clara descended the stairs with practiced grace, her father steady beside her. Through the windows, she could see the assembled guests rising to their feet, turning to watch her approach. She recognized faces, politicians, businessmen, society wives, and underneath the veneer of respectability, the real power structure of New York's criminal elite. The Castellanos, Victor's biggest rivals. The Kowalskis, his reluctant allies. The Yusufs, neutral but watching. And scattered among them, men and women in catering uniforms who weren't really servers at all. She reached the bottom of the stairs. The doors to the garden stood open, the aisle stretching ahead of her like a path through fire. At the end, beneath the elaborate arch, Victor waited. He looked perfect. Devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, his dark hair styled precisely, his expression carefully arranged into tender anticipation. To anyone watching, he appeared to be a man desperately in love, waiting for his bride. Clara knew better. She'd seen his real face 4 hours ago, twisted with pleasure as he betrayed her with her own cousin. She'd seen it a dozen other times, cold with rage when she questioned him, cruel with satisfaction when he reminded her how completely he controlled her life, empty with indifference when she tried to connect with him as a person rather than a possession. The monster in the fairy tale always looked beautiful. That's how he got close enough to devour you. "Ready?" her father whispered. Clara adjusted her grip on her bouquet, feeling the small device Ethan had hidden among the roses. One press, and everything would begin. All the files uploaded to cloud servers. All the evidence simultaneously delivered to federal prosecutors. All the allies positioned throughout the crowd activated. One press, and Victor Rinaldi's empire would start its collapse. But not yet. Timing was everything. Ethan had been clear about that. "Wait for the vows," he'd said during their last planning session, his gray eyes serious as he held both her hands. "Wait until the moment when everyone's attention is completely focused on you and Victor. Maximum witnesses, maximum impact. When the officiant asks if you take Victor Rinaldi to be your husband, that's when you activate the signal. That's when I step forward. That's when everything changes." Clara had memorized every word, rehearsed every movement, prepared for every contingency they could imagine. Now, walking down the aisle with her father's arm supporting her, she let herself look at the man who'd made this all possible. Ethan Blackwell stood near the back, dressed in the formal black uniform of his catering company's management team. To anyone watching, he was simply the caterer, overseeing the event. Only Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked her progress, the slight movement of his hand near his jacket pocket where she knew he carried his own trigger for the plan. Their eyes met for half a second. He nodded, barely perceptible. She was not alone in this. Whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. The walk felt endless and instantaneous. Faces blurred past her, shocked expressions, knowing smiles, greedy eyes watching the senator's daughter deliver herself to the mob. Clara kept her expression serene, her steps measured, her breathing controlled. She reached the altar. Her father kissed her cheek, whispered something about happiness that she barely heard, and placed her hand in Victor's. Victor's grip was possessive, his fingers tight around hers. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "You look exquisite. Did you find what you were looking for earlier?" Ice water in her veins. He knew. Of course he knew. Victor always knew everything. "I found exactly what I needed," Clara replied, her voice steady. His smile widened, sharp with satisfaction. "Good. Then you understand how things work now. You understand what happens to people who think about disappointing me." It wasn't a question, it was a reminder, a threat wrapped in wedding vows. Clara's hand tightened on her bouquet. Not yet. Not quite yet. The officiant began the ceremony. Standard words about love and commitment, honor and cherish. Clara barely heard them. She was counting the federal agents she'd identified in the crowd, counting the witnesses who'd testify, counting the seconds until the moment when everything would shatter. Victor's hand remained locked around hers, his thumb stroking her pulse point, claiming, marking, reminding her who owned her, except he didn't, not anymore. The officiant reached the critical moment. "Victor Alessandro Rinaldi, Do you take Clara Marie Moreau to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Victor's voice rang out, confident and commanding. He turned to look at Clara, his expression triumphant. In his eyes, she could see everything he believed, that he'd won, that she was his, that this ceremony sealed her fate forever. And do you, Clara Marie Moreau, take Victor Alessandro Rinaldi to be your lawfully wedded husband? The garden went silent. 400 people held their breath. Victor's hand tightened on hers, crushing her fingers. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd courted her with poetry and promises, then slowly revealed the monster underneath. This man who'd isolated her from friends, monitored her movements, controlled her choices. This man who'd threatened her father's career if she ever tried to leave. This man who'd been inside her cousin 4 hours ago while Clara prepared to give him her entire life. She thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, confident, ambitious, free. She thought about the woman she'd become, fearful, controlled, trapped. She thought about the woman she was about to be, free, powerful, choosing herself. And then she thought about Ethan Blackwell, who'd looked at her with respect instead of possession, who'd offered her partnership instead of ownership, who'd spent 6 months helping her build an escape route without asking for anything in return except the chance to stand beside her when she finally claimed her freedom. Clara smiled. "No," she said clearly. "I don't." The garden erupted. Gasps, shouts, confusion rippling through the crowd. Victor's face went white, then red, then purple, with rage. His hand crushed hers hard enough to bruise. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, deadly, vibrating with barely controlled violence. Clara pressed the device hidden in her bouquet. Somewhere, servers and security protocols activated. Files began uploading. Evidence started flowing. The trap sprang. "I said no, Victor. I don't take you. I don't choose you. I never will." She pulled her hand free. He was too shocked to maintain his grip and turned to face the crowd. Rachel stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. Clara's father looked stricken, confused. The Castellanos were whispering urgently among themselves, and Ethan was moving forward, cutting through the crowd with smooth efficiency. "Clara!" Victor's hand shot out, grabbing her arm hard enough to hurt. "You will not embarrass me like this. You will say yes. We will finish this ceremony, and then we will discuss your little outburst in private. Do you understand me?" In private, where no one would see, where no one would hear her scream. "I understand perfectly," Clara said. "I understand that you've been using me, that you've been controlling me, that you had sex with my cousin 4 hours before our wedding and thought I'd just accept it because I'm too weak to fight back." Victor's face went blank with shock. Around them, the whispers grew louder. Phones appeared, people filming, exactly as Ethan had predicted they would. "You're making a mistake," Victor hissed. "You think you can walk away from me? You think I'll just let you go? Your father's career, your family's reputation, your safety, all of it depends on you getting back in line right now." "My safety?" Clara laughed, and it came out sharp enough to cut. "I've never been safe with you, Victor. I've been your prisoner, your trophy, your perfect, controllable bride. But I'm done being what you want me to be." Ethan reached the altar. He moved between Clara and Victor with the kind of smooth, protective grace that spoke of extensive training. Up close, he looked nothing like a caterer, and everything like what he really was. A former Marine intelligence officer who'd built a security empire, a billionaire who'd used his resources to help people escape exactly the kind of situation Clara had been trapped in. "Step back, Rinaldi," Ethan said quietly. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Blackwell, I should have known. You've been sniffing around my fiancée for months." "She's not your fiancée." Ethan's voice stayed calm, but his body language shifted into something dangerous. "She was never going to be your wife. She's been mine for 3 months already." The crowd exploded with noise. Victor's face contorted with rage. His hand moved towards his jacket, where Clara knew he kept a weapon, because Victor always kept weapons close. But Ethan was faster, and the federal agents embedded in the crowd were faster still. "Victor Rinaldi!" A woman's voice cut through the chaos, loud and authoritative. "FBI, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and approximately 47 other charges. Put your hands where I can see them." Agent Sarah Chen stepped forward, badge raised, flanked by a dozen other agents who'd shed their catering uniforms for tactical gear. The string quartet had stopped playing. The guests were scrambling backward, creating space. Phones were everywhere now, capturing every second. Victor looked at Clara, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than control in his eyes. She saw fear. "You did this," he said. Not a question, an accusation. "I did," Clara confirmed, "with help. From people who actually care about me. From people who don't think love means ownership. You'll regret this. When they can't make the charges stick, when I walk free, when I come for you and everyone you care about, you'll beg me to take you back." Ethan's hand settled on the small of Clara's back, steady and warm. "The charges will stick. We have 7 years of documentation, 3 witnesses in protective custody, financial records that trace every dollar. And as of yesterday afternoon, your former lieutenant, Marco Santini, signed a cooperation agreement. It's over, Rinaldi." Victor's face went slack with shock. "Marco? That's impossible. He's loyal. He was loyal until you ordered him to kill his own cousin to prove his commitment. Turns out that was a bridge too far." Ethan's smile was cold. "You should have been more careful about who you trusted." The FBI agents moved in. Victor fought. Of course he did, because men like Victor couldn't accept losing control. But within seconds, they had him restrained. Agent Chen was reading him his rights while other agents began methodically arresting his associates scattered throughout the crowd. The carefully planned wedding descended into chaos. Guests fled or stood frozen in shock. Rachel finally reached Clara's side, her face pale but determined. "What the hell is happening?" "I'm escaping," Clara said simply. "I've been planning it for months. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you." Victor was really that bad? Clara showed her the bruises on her wrist from Victor's grip, already darkening. "He's a monster, Rachel. A very good actor, but a monster. And I'm done pretending he's anything else." Her father pushed through the crowd, his distinguished face ravaged with shock and confusion. "Clara, what have you done?" "What I should have done a year ago, Dad. I'm sorry. I know this will affect your career, your reputation, but I couldn't marry him. I couldn't spend my life with someone who would destroy me piece by piece." Senator Moreau looked at Ethan, then at the FBI agents, then back at his daughter. Understanding began to dawn in his eyes. "How long have you known? About Victor's real business?" "Long enough," Clara said. "I have documentation, evidence, everything you'd need if you want to distance yourself politically from this mess. I made sure you'd be protected." Her father's eyes filled with tears. He pulled her into a fierce hug, crushing her against his chest. "I don't care about my career. I care about you, my brilliant, brave girl. You should have come to me. He threatened you, threatened your career, your safety. I couldn't risk it. We could have faced him together. We are facing him together, just on my timeline, my terms." Ethan cleared his throat gently. "We should move. The press will be here soon and Clara needs to be somewhere safe before the story breaks." Clara pulled back from her father, wiping her eyes. The garden was clearing now, agents escorting people out, securing the scene. The white roses and crystal arch stood abandoned, monuments to a wedding that would never be completed. She looked at Ethan, this man who'd spent 6 months helping her build an escape route without asking for anything in return. This man who'd married her yesterday in a quiet ceremony with only lawyers and 2 witnesses, making it legally impossible for Victor to ever claim her. This man who'd just publicly declared himself on her side, painting a target on his own back to protect her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For all of it." Ethan's gray eyes softened. "You did this, Clara. You made the choice. You built the plan. You found the courage. I just helped with the logistics. The logistics that included marrying a stranger and taking on the most dangerous criminal in New York. You're not a stranger anymore. And I faced worse than Victor Rinaldi." He held out his hand. "Ready to leave your wedding?" Clara looked back one last time. Victor was being loaded into an FBI vehicle, still shouting threats. The Castellanos were in quiet conversation with Agent Chen, probably negotiating their own deals. The beautiful garden was crawling with federal agents and crime scene technicians. Her wedding. The day that was supposed to mark the beginning of her new life with Victor. It was ending exactly as she'd planned, just not at all like she'd once imagined. She took Ethan's hand. More than ready. They walked back down the aisle together, past shocked guests and federal agents, past her stunned bridesmaids and worried father, past the ruins of Victor's perfect ceremony. Clara's wedding dress dragged in the grass, collecting dirt and damage, the expensive lace tearing on decorative stones. She didn't care. She was done being Victor's perfect bride, done being anything except herself. Outside, a black SUV waited. Ethan's security team, ready to move. He opened the door for her, helped her manage the ridiculous train of her dress. As she slid into the leather seat, Clara caught her reflection in the tinted window. She still looked like a bride. But the woman staring back at her wasn't the same one who'd found her fiancé with her cousin 4 hours ago. That woman had been trapped, controlled, powerless. This woman had just destroyed a criminal empire. This woman had chosen herself. This woman was free. Ethan climbed in beside her, signaling the driver to move. As they pulled away from the estate, Clara watched it recede in the side mirror, the mansion, the garden, the life she'd almost had. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan settled back against the seat, his hand finding hers. "Now? We make sure the case against Victor is airtight. We keep you safe until he's convicted and locked away. We deal with the media circus that's about to descend. And when it's all over and you've had time to process everything that just happened," he paused, his eyes searching hers. "We figure out what comes next. Together, if you want. Separately, if that's better for you. No pressure, no control. Just choices." Choices. The word felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the simple gold band he'd placed on her finger yesterday. A real marriage to a man she barely knew, entered into as strategy and protection. But also, maybe, possibly, the beginning of something true. "Together sounds good," she said softly. "For now, at least. We can figure out the rest as we go." Ethan smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and genuine. "For now is perfect." The SUV merged onto the highway, carrying Clara away from her shattered wedding and toward a future she'd get to choose for herself. Behind them, Victor Rinaldi's empire continued its collapse. Ahead of them, uncertainty and possibility waited in equal measure. But for the first time in 18 months, Clara Moreau wasn't afraid of what came next. She was finally, gloriously free. And this time, no one would ever take that freedom away. The safe house was nothing like Victor's mansion. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, no staff hovering with champagne and canapes. Just a modest brownstone in Brooklyn with reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, and enough security equipment to protect a small country. Clara sat in the living room still wearing her wedding dress, the torn lace pooling around her feet like the remnants of a life she'd just demolished. Her hand shook as she tried to remove the elaborate veil, bobby pins scattering across the hardwood floor. "Here, let me help." Ethan knelt beside her chair, his fingers gentle as he carefully extracted the pins from her hair. "You're going to pull half your hair out trying to do this yourself." "I don't care about my hair right now." "I know, but you will tomorrow, and I'd rather not have you blame me for the bald spots." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Is this what you do? Make jokes while criminals threaten to destroy everyone I love?" "It's one of my many coping mechanisms. I also stress bake, but that seems less practical at the moment." The veil came free, and Ethan set it aside carefully. "Your father's outside with Agent Chen. They've been talking for 40 minutes. I think she's briefing him on the extent of Victor's operations." Clara's stomach twisted. "He's going to hate me. His entire political career is built on fighting organized crime, and his daughter was about to marry the biggest crime boss in New York." "You didn't know. Not at first." "I knew enough. I knew for months before I met you. I told myself I was imagining things. That Victor's business dealings were questionable but not criminal. That the warnings people tried to give me were just jealousy or misunderstanding." She looked down at her hands, at the simple gold band on her left ring finger. "I was a coward." Ethan sat back on his heels, his gray eyes serious. "You were isolated, manipulated, and controlled by someone who'd spent 18 months perfecting his hold on you. That's not cowardice, Clara. That's survival. And the moment you saw a way out, you took it. That's bravery. I married you to escape him. How is that brave? I just traded one man for another. The words came out harsh, unfair. Clara knew it even as she said them, but the adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her raw and mean and desperate to hurt something. Ethan didn't flinch. He stood, moved to the window, and looked out at the quiet Brooklyn street. You married me for protection, for legal cover that would make it harder for Victor to claim you as property. I knew that going in. I agreed to it, and whenever you're ready to annul this marriage and walk away, I'll sign the papers without hesitation. Just like that? Just like that. He turned to face her. I didn't help you escape Victor's cage so I could build my own. I helped you because the first time I met you at that catering consultation 6 months ago, you looked at me with such desperate hope that it broke something in me. Because I've spent the last 5 years using my resources to help people escape situations exactly like yours. Because I believe everyone deserves to choose their own life. He paused. And because, even though we barely know each other, I respect you too much to pretend this marriage is anything other than what it is. A legal strategy. Anything else would have to be your choice, your timeline, your decision. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Some knot she hadn't realized was choking her. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said, you're allowed to be angry, you're allowed to lash out. You just destroyed your entire life in front of 400 witnesses, and the man who terrorized you for 18 months is probably making very detailed plans about how to hurt you. If you weren't angry, I'd be worried. The door opened and Senator Moreau entered, his face gray with exhaustion. Agent Chen followed, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes sympathetic. Clara. Her father crossed to her, pulling her to her feet and into another crushing embrace. Agent Chen explained everything. The extent of Victor's organization, what he's been doing, what he threatened you with. I had no idea, sweetheart. No idea what you were going through. I hid it well. He taught me how. Her father pulled back, his hands framing her face. When did you know? About his real business. Clara thought back to the moment everything had crystallized. About 8 months ago. I overheard a phone conversation. He was ordering someone to hurt a witness, make them reconsider testifying. I confronted him about it, and he explained very calmly that business sometimes required unpleasant necessities, that I needed to understand he would always do what was necessary to protect what was his. And you stayed with him for 8 more months? The judgment in his voice was faint but present. Clara felt it like a slap. He made it very clear what would happen if I left. Your career would be destroyed. Fabricated evidence of corruption, mistresses, bribery. He had files prepared, Dad, ready to leak to every news outlet in the country. He showed me, made sure I understood that my choices affected more than just me. Senator Moreau's face went pale. You should have told me. We could have… What? Gone to the authorities with a story about overhearing a phone call? Victor's lawyers would have buried us. His connections run deep. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. So I started gathering it. She looked at Ethan. Until I met someone who could help me do more than just collect evidence. Someone who could help me actually escape. Agent Chen stepped forward. Mr. Blackwell's organization has been invaluable. His security expertise, his connections, his resources. Without his involvement, building a case against Rinaldi would have taken years. As it is, we have enough to put him away for life. How long have you been working with the FBI? Claire's father asked Ethan. 5 years since I left military intelligence and started my security company. We've helped the Bureau build cases against 17 different organized crime operations. This is the biggest one yet. Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact, professional. When Clara approached me about catering the wedding, I recognized her name from our background research on Rinaldi. I suggested a private meeting to discuss menu options. During that meeting, she asked if my firm did personal security. I said yes. And then she asked if I'd ever helped anyone escape from a dangerous situation. I showed her our track record. And you married her? Her father's voice sharpened. That seems like a significant escalation from personal security. It was her idea, actually, Clara interjected. I researched the legal protections marriage provides. Spousal privilege in court, shared legal rights, difficulty in enforcing contracts or agreements made before the marriage. Victor had me sign a prenuptial agreement that essentially gave him control over any attempt I made to leave. Marriage to someone else invalidated it. So you married a stranger. I married someone who offered me a way out, someone who asked for nothing in return except the chance to help bring down a monster. Clara looked at Ethan, at this man she'd legally bound herself to with such trust and desperation. It's more than Victor ever gave me. Choice, respect, freedom. Agent Chen cleared her throat. Senator Moreau, I need to brief you on the security situation. Rinaldi's organization is large and well-funded. Even with him in custody, there are people loyal to him who might attempt retaliation against your daughter. What kind of retaliation? Kidnapping, intimidation, violence designed to force her to recant testimony or create reasonable doubt about the evidence. Agent Chen's voice remained calm, clinical. We've already intercepted communications suggesting his lieutenants are considering options. That's why we insisted on the safe house and Mr. Blackwell's continued involvement. His security team is the best in the country. Clara's father sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. This is really happening. My daughter is in danger because she was brave enough to leave an abusive relationship. Your daughter is in danger because she chose to testify against one of the most powerful criminals in New York, rather than just escape quietly, Agent Chen corrected. What she's doing takes extraordinary courage. The evidence she gathered, the testimony she's prepared to give, it's going to dismantle an organization that's operated with impunity for decades. I don't feel courageous, Clara said quietly. I feel terrified. Ethan moved to stand beside her chair. Courage and terror aren't mutually exclusive. You're allowed to be both. The conversation continued, logistics, security protocols, legal procedures, but Clara felt herself drifting away from it. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation with Victor was completely gone now, leaving her hollow and exhausted. Her wedding dress felt impossibly heavy, the corset crushing her ribs, the weight of the fabric dragging at her shoulders. She stood abruptly, interrupting Agent Chen mid-sentence. I need to change. I need to get out of this dress. Understanding flickered across Ethan's face. Second floor, first door on the right. There are clothes in the closet. We stocked basics in various sizes. Clara fled upstairs, her hands already clawing at the buttons running down her spine. The dress had required 2 people to get her into it this morning, Rachel and another bridesmaid working together to fasten the dozens of tiny pearl buttons. Now Clara twisted and strained, managing to unfasten the top few before the angle became impossible. She caught sight of herself in the bedroom mirror and froze. The woman staring back was a stranger. Elaborate updo coming loose, makeup smeared from tears she didn't remember crying, wedding dress gaping open at the back. She looked destroyed, devastated, nothing like the confident senator's daughter who'd walked into Victor's world 18 months ago. A knock on the door made her jump. "It's me," Ethan called. "I thought you might need help with the buttons." Clara hesitated, then opened the door. He stepped inside, carefully not looking at her exposed back, his eyes focused on her face. "Turn around," he said gently. She did, and felt his fingers begin working the buttons free with practiced efficiency. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with everything unsaid. "How many women have you helped?" Clara asked finally. Escape abusive situations, 43, not all of them from organized crime, some from domestic violence situations, some from human trafficking, some from cults or extremist groups. We have a whole division dedicated to extraction and relocation. "And how many of them did you marry?" His fingers paused on a particularly stubborn button. "Just you." "Why?" "Because your situation required it. Because the legal protections were necessary. Because—" He fell silent for a moment, then continued unfastening buttons. "Because when you suggested it, you looked me in the eye and said, 'I know this is asking too much, but I'm out of options, and I'm desperate, and I trust you.' And I couldn't say no to that." The last button came free. Clara felt the dress loosen, no longer crushing her ribs. She held the front of it against her chest and turned to face him. "I did trust you. I still do, but I don't know why. We've spent maybe 20 hours total in each other's company, most of that time planning logistics for today. I don't know your favorite color or what you do for fun or if you have family or anything that actually matters. Ethan smiled faintly. My favorite color is green, like the ocean in summer. I restore vintage motorcycles for fun because working with my hands helps me think. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19. My sister lives in Seattle with her wife and 2 kids. I drink my coffee black, I hate mushrooms, and I've been told I work too much. He paused. What else would you like to know? Everything, Clara thought, and nothing. She was so tired of calculating, analyzing, trying to find the trap in people's kindness. Why do you do this? Help people escape. Build cases against criminals? You're a billionaire. You could be doing anything. His expression shuddered. Because when I was in military intelligence, I saw what happens when powerful people face no consequences for their actions. I saw victims blamed, witnesses intimidated, evidence buried. I saw people who deserved justice get destroyed by the very systems meant to protect them. And when I left the military, I decided I'd use my resources to even the odds, to be the kind of help I wished had existed for... He stopped abruptly. For who? For someone I couldn't protect. A long time ago. His voice was carefully neutral, but Clara heard the pain underneath. Someone who needed help escaping a bad situation and didn't get it in time. Clara understood then. The intensity with which he'd committed to her plan, the thoroughness of the preparation, the way he'd looked at her with such fierce protectiveness even though they were strangers. This wasn't just business for him. This was personal. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be. They're gone. But everyone I help now, that's me making sure their story ends differently. Clara let the dress fall, stepping out of the puddle of lace and silk and broken dreams. She stood in her undergarments, aware of his careful gaze staying fixed on her face, and felt something shift between them. Not attraction exactly, though she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward this man who'd risked everything to help her. More like recognition. 2 people shaped by loss and control, choosing differently. Thank you, she said. For today. For the last 6 months. For marrying a stranger to keep her safe. You're welcome. Ethan moved toward the door, giving her privacy. Get changed. Rest if you can. Agent Chen wants to prep you for the preliminary hearing tomorrow, but that can wait a few hours. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara stood alone in the bedroom, surrounded by the ruins of her wedding dress, and finally let herself cry. Not for Victor, not for the life she'd almost had, but for the woman she'd been before him, the one who'd believed the world was fundamentally safe, who'd trusted her own judgment, who'd never had to plan an escape from the man who claimed to love her. That woman was gone. Clara understood that now. Today hadn't just destroyed Victor's empire. It had destroyed every illusion she'd carried about herself, her choices, her ability to see danger before it consumed her. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe she needed to demolish everything to build something real. She changed into jeans and a sweater from the closet, both fitting reasonably well, washed her face free of makeup, pulled her hair into a simple ponytail. When she looked in the mirror again, she saw someone closer to who she used to be. Before Victor. Before the fear. Downstairs, voices drifted up. Her father, Agent Chen, Ethan, all discussing security and legal strategy and what came next. Clara took a breath, steadied herself, and went to join them. The next 3 hours were a blur of preparation. Agent Chen walked her through what to expect at the preliminary hearing, the questions prosecutors would ask, the way Victor's lawyers would try to discredit her, the importance of staying calm, focused, telling the truth without embellishment. They'll paint you as a scorned woman seeking revenge, Agent Chen explained. They'll suggest you fabricated evidence because you were angry about his infidelity. They'll try to make this about a messy breakup instead of a criminal enterprise. Let them try, Clara said. I have documentation spanning 18 months, financial records, recordings of conversations, testimony from people Victor thought were loyal. His affair with Gabrielle is just context. The crimes are what matter. Her father squeezed her hand. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I had to be. Victor didn't leave room for weakness. As evening fell, Agent Chen departed with promises to return in the morning. Clara's father left reluctantly, only after Ethan assured him the brownstone had better security than most government facilities. And then it was just the two of them, married strangers in a safe house, trying to figure out what normal conversation looked like. "You should eat something," Ethan said. "You haven't had anything since breakfast." Clara realized he was right. Her stomach felt hollow, though the idea of food made her slightly nauseous. "I'm not really hungry." "Eat anyway. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. You need your strength." He led her to the kitchen, where he efficiently assembled sandwiches while Clara perched on a bar stool and watched. There was something surreal about the domesticity of it. This morning, she'd been preparing to marry a crime boss. Tonight, she was eating turkey sandwiches with the billionaire security expert she'd married yesterday to escape him. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said between bites. "Of course." "What happens after? After the trial, after Victor's convicted, after everything settles? What happens to—" She gestured between them. "This?" Ethan set down his sandwich, giving her his full attention. "That depends entirely on what you want. The marriage can be annulled. We can go our separate ways. You can rebuild your life however you choose, and I'll make sure you have the resources and security to do it safely. And if I don't want that, then we figure out what you do want. Together." His gray eyes were steady on hers. "I meant what I said earlier, Clara. I have no expectations here. No agenda beyond keeping you safe and helping you heal. If friendship is all you want from me, that's enough. If you want space and distance, that's fine too. And if eventually you want to explore whether this—" He gestured between them, echoing her earlier motion. "Could be something more than a legal convenience. I'm open to that conversation. But only when you're ready. Only when you've had time to be free without anyone controlling your choices." "That's very reasonable of you." "I've been told I'm annoyingly reasonable." Clara smiled despite herself. "Who told you that?" "My sister, repeatedly. Usually when I'm trying to solve her problems, instead of just listening to her complain about them." "Tell me about her, about Seattle and your nieces and normal things. I need to think about something other than tomorrow." So Ethan talked about his sister Maya, who taught elementary school and made the world's worst coffee. About his nieces, 7 and 9, who were convinced their uncle was secretly a superhero because of all the security equipment in his office. About restoring motorcycles in his garage. The meditative quality of mechanical work, the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. Clara listened, asking questions, letting his voice fill the silence. And slowly, gradually, she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. This was what normal felt like. Conversation without calculation. Comfort without cost. "Thank you," she said when he finally wound down. "For the distraction." "Any time. That's what husbands are for, right? Rambling about motorcycles until you fall asleep." "Is that what you are? My husband?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "Legally, yes. In every other way, I'm whatever you need me to be, friend, protector, ally. The label matters less than the reality." Clara stood, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be brutal." "Yes, we covered that." Ethan gestured toward the stairs. "Master bedroom is yours. I'll take the guest room. Lock your door if it makes you feel safer." "I trust you." "I know, but trust and safety are different things. Lock it anyway." She did, though she wasn't sure if it was for protection or just to have one barrier she controlled. The bedroom was simply furnished: bed, dresser, bathroom. Nothing like Victor's mansion, where every surface had been a stage for displaying wealth. Clara lay down without bothering to change, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day. The moment she'd found Victor with Gabrielle. The walk down the aisle, the look on his face when she'd said no. The satisfaction of watching federal agents arrest him in front of everyone he'd tried to impress. She'd done it, actually done it, destroyed a criminal empire and escaped the man who'd terrorized her. So why did she still feel so afraid? Her phone buzzed, the regular one, not the burner. She almost ignored it, then saw her father's name on the screen. "I'm proud of you. Your mother would be too. Sleep well, sweetheart. Tomorrow, we fight." Clara clutched the phone to her chest and finally let herself believe it. She'd survived the wedding. She'd survived Victor's rage. She'd survived the moment when everything changed. Tomorrow she'd face the next battle. But tonight, in this safe house with a man who'd married her to protect her, she was free. And no one, Not Victor, not his lawyers, not the criminal empire he'd built would ever take that freedom away. She fell asleep with that thought warming her like armor, ready for whatever came next. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and 3 seconds of blessed confusion before memory crashed back. The wedding, Victor, the arrest, everything. She reached for her phone. 6:43 a.m. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10. She had 3 hours to prepare herself to face Victor Rinaldi across a courtroom and tell the world exactly what kind of monster he was. Her hands were already shaking. A soft knock on the door made her sit up. "Clara, I have coffee if you're awake." Ethan's voice, calm and steady. Clara realized she'd slept better than she had in months, knowing he was just down the hall, knowing someone was watching for danger instead of creating it. "I'm awake. Come in." He entered carrying 2 mugs, dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look less like a caterer and more like what he actually was, a man who commanded empires, just legal ones. He handed her 1 mug and settled into the chair by the window. "Agent Chen called. She's on her way. Your father's meeting us at the courthouse." He paused, studying her face. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified. Determined. Like I might throw up." Clara sipped the coffee, black and strong. "Is this normal?" "Completely. I've seen trained soldiers shake before testimony. You're about to walk into a room with the man who controlled your life for 18 months and tell strangers the worst things he did to you. Terror is the only sane response." "That's not particularly comforting." "I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to tell you the truth." Ethan's gray eyes were steady on hers. "The truth is, today is going to be hell. Victor's lawyers will try to destroy you. The media will dissect every word. People will judge you for staying with him, for not speaking up sooner, for 1,000 choices you made under duress. And none of that matters, because at the end of today, you'll have done what most people never find the courage to do. You'll have stood up and told the truth." Clara set down her coffee mug with hands that trembled only slightly. "What if I freeze? What if I get up there and I can't speak?" "Then you take a breath, look at your father in the gallery, and remember why you're doing this. Not for revenge, not even for justice, though that matters. You're doing this so the next woman Victor targets won't have to plan an escape from her own wedding." The weight of that settled over Clara like a mantle. She wasn't just testifying for herself. She was testifying for every person who'd ever been trapped by someone who mistook control for love. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I can do this. I know you can. That's why I married you." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips curve into a small smile. "You married me because I asked you to. I married you because you were brave enough to ask. There's a difference." Ethan stood, moving toward the door. "Agent Chen will be here in 20 minutes. Wear something that makes you feel strong." After he left, Clara showered and dressed with careful attention. Not the expensive designer clothes Victor had preferred. Those were all back at his mansion, and she never wanted to see them again. Instead, she chose a simple navy suit from the safe house closet, paired with low heels and minimal jewelry. Professional. Credible, her own. She was fastening her watch when her phone rang. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Clara hesitated, then answered. "Hey." "Oh, thank God." Rachel's voice was thick with tears. "I've been calling since yesterday. I saw the news. Clara, what the hell happened? They're saying Victor's a mob boss, that you were working with the FBI, that you married your caterer. His name is Ethan, and it's all true." Silence stretched between them. Then, "You couldn't tell me?" "Victor had people watching me, everyone I talked to, everywhere I went. I couldn't risk him finding out. I couldn't risk you getting hurt because of what you knew." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I wanted to tell you so many times." "How long were you planning this?" 6 months? Since I met Ethan and realized I had options other than just enduring." 6 months? Rachel's voice broke. "I stood beside you yesterday helping you get ready to marry a man you were planning to destroy. I told you how happy you'd be with him. I was so stupid. You weren't stupid. You believed what I showed you, what Victor trained me to show everyone. The perfect couple, the fairy tale romance. It was all a performance." "Were you ever happy with him? Even in the beginning?" Clara thought back to the early days. Victor's attentiveness, his gifts, his declarations of devotion. She'd mistaken intensity for love, possession for passion. I thought I was, but real happiness doesn't require you to become someone else. Real happiness doesn't make you afraid. And this Ethan guy? Are you happy with him? I barely know him. We got married for legal protection, nothing more. The news is calling it the most romantic thing they've ever seen. The caterer who fell in love with the bride and rescued her from a monster. Clara closed her eyes. Of course, the media would spin it that way. America loved a rescue story, especially one with a handsome billionaire playing hero. Never mind that Clara had rescued herself. Never mind that her relationship with Ethan was complicated and contractual, and nothing like a fairy tale. Don't believe everything you read, Clara said quietly. The truth is a lot messier than romance. Will you be okay? I mean really okay, not just telling me what I want to hear? I don't know yet. Ask me again when Victor's in prison, and I've had time to remember who I was before him. I'm here if you need me. I know I wasn't there when you needed me before, but I'm here now. Thank you. That means more than you know. They said goodbye, and Clara sat with the phone in her hand, staring at nothing. Rachel was her oldest friend, and she hadn't been able to trust her with the truth. That's what Victor had done, isolated her so completely that even her closest relationships became performances. Never again, Clara promised herself. Whatever life she built after this, it would be built on honesty. No more masks, no more pretending. Agent Chen arrived precisely on time, all business in a black pantsuit. She walked Clara through what to expect one more time, her voice calm and methodical. The preliminary hearing would determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Clara would testify about Victor's criminal activities, the threats he'd made, the control he'd exerted. The defense would try to discredit her. The judge would make a ruling. Remember, Agent Chen said as they prepared to leave, you're not trying to convince anyone of anything today. You're simply telling the truth. The evidence will speak for itself. The drive to the courthouse felt both endless and instantaneous. Clara sat in the back of the SUV between Ethan and Agent Chen, watching the city slide past the tinted windows. Somewhere out there, people were going about their normal Monday morning routines, completely unaware that Clara's world had detonated less than 24 hours ago. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Camera flashes exploded as the SUV pulled up. Microphones thrust toward the windows, shouted questions Clara couldn't quite hear through the bulletproof glass. Stay close to me, Ethan said. Don't answer any questions. Don't make eye contact. Just walk. Clara nodded, her mouth too dry for speech. Agent Chen exited first, followed by two of Ethan's security team. Then Ethan took Clara's hand and they stepped out into the chaos. The noise was overwhelming. Reporters screaming her name, asking about Victor, demanding to know if she was afraid, if she regretted anything, if the wedding had all been planned. Clara kept her eyes forward and let Ethan guide her through the crowd, his hand steady and warm around hers. They made it through security and into a private conference room where her father waited. Senator Moreau pulled her into a tight embrace, his cologne familiar and comforting. You look strong, he said, holding her at arm's length. You look ready. I don't feel ready. No one ever does. But you're going to be magnificent anyway. The assistant district attorney assigned to the case appeared, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Alvarez, who'd built her career prosecuting organized crime. She shook Clara's hand with a grip like iron. I've reviewed your testimony and the supporting evidence, Patricia said without preamble. It's comprehensive, damning. Rinaldi's lawyers are going to try to paint you as a vengeful ex-fiancé, but the financial records don't lie. Neither do the recordings or the witness statements. Stay calm, answer truthfully, and we'll get through this. What if I mess up? What if I say something wrong? Then we correct it and move forward. This isn't about perfection, Clara. It's about truth. Patricia's expression softened fractionally. I've been prosecuting men like Victor Rinaldi for 15 years. I've seen what they do to the people trapped in their orbits. What you're doing today takes extraordinary courage. Don't doubt that. A bailiff appeared at the door. Judge Brennan is ready. Clara's heart stuttered. This was it. No more preparation, no more delay. Time to face the man who'd controlled her life and tell the world what he'd hidden behind expensive suits and charitable donations. Ethan squeezed her hand. You've got this. Stay close? I'll be right behind you, the whole time. The courtroom was packed. Clara walked down the center aisle, feeling hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. She spotted familiar faces in the gallery. Rachel, looking pale and worried. Several of Victor's business associates, their expressions ranging from hostile to calculating. Reporters sketching frantically in notebooks since cameras weren't allowed inside. And there, at the defense table, Victor Rinaldi sat in an orange jumpsuit that should have diminished him, but somehow didn't. He looked exactly as he had yesterday, devastatingly handsome, perfectly composed, utterly in control. When his eyes met Clara's, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who still believed he held all the power, who thought this was all just a temporary setback before he reclaimed what belonged to him. Clara felt ice crystallize in her spine. She sat in the witness box, placed her hand on the Bible for the oath, and met Victor's eyes without flinching. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." Patricia Alvarez approached with a legal pad and a calm, professional demeanor. "Please state your full name for the record." "Clara Marie Moreau." "And how do you know the defendant, Victor Rinaldi?" "We were engaged to be married until yesterday when I discovered him in bed with my cousin 4 hours before our wedding ceremony." A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. Judge Brennan, a stern woman in her 60s, rapped her gavel once. "Order," Patricia continued smoothly. "How long were you in a relationship with Mr. Rinaldi?" 18 months. "And during that time, did you become aware of his business activities?" "Yes. Approximately 10 months into our relationship, I overheard a phone conversation where Victor ordered someone to intimidate a witness who was planning to testify against one of his associates. When I asked him about it, he explained that his business sometimes required what he called unpleasant necessities." "What did you understand that to mean?" "That he was involved in criminal activities, that violence was part of how he maintained control." Victor's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Robert Kensington, shot to his feet. "Objection. The witness is speculating about my client's meaning rather than testifying to facts." Judge Brennan looked at Clara. "Did the defendant use those specific words, unpleasant necessities?" "Yes, Your Honor. He said, and I quote, 'Business sometimes requires unpleasant necessities. You need to understand that I will always do what's necessary to protect what's mine.'" "The objection is overruled. Continue, Ms. Alvarez." Patricia walked Clara through the next several months, the way Victor had gradually isolated her from friends and family, the tracking devices he'd installed in her car and phone, the threats he'd made against her father's career if she ever tried to leave. Clara's voice remained steady as she recounted conversations, provided dates and specifics, painted a picture of systematic control and manipulation. "Did there come a time when you decided to gather evidence against Mr. Rinaldi?" Patricia asked. "Yes. About 8 months ago, I realized I needed proof of his criminal activities if I wanted to escape safely, so I started documenting everything. Financial transactions, conversations, meetings with associates. I kept records of threats he made, promises he broke, violence he ordered." "And how did you compile this evidence without the defendant discovering what you were doing?" Clara glanced at Ethan, sitting in the front row beside her father. "I had help. From someone who understood how dangerous Victor was and who had resources to assist me." "You're referring to Ethan Blackwell?" "Yes." "How did you meet Mr. Blackwell?" "He owns a security and catering company. I hired his firm to cater the wedding. During our initial consultation, I recognized his name from media coverage of his work helping people escape dangerous situations. I asked if he might be willing to help me. He agreed." Patricia nodded, making a note. "And at some point, you and Mr. Blackwell married. Can you explain the circumstances of that marriage?" "Victor had me sign a prenuptial agreement that essentially gave him legal control over any attempt I made to leave the relationship. The agreement included clauses about me not speaking publicly about our relationship, not cooperating with law enforcement, not contacting certain people he viewed as threats. My attorney explained that marriage to another person would invalidate the agreement and provide certain legal protections. So I asked Ethan if he'd be willing to marry me. He said yes." "When did this marriage take place?" "The day before the scheduled wedding to Victor. We had a private ceremony with only lawyers and witnesses present." Another wave of whispers. Victor's face had gone very still, his eyes locked on Clara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. But she didn't look away. Wouldn't give him the satisfaction of her fear. Patricia continued her questioning for another 20 minutes, establishing the scope of Victor's criminal enterprise, the evidence Clara had gathered, the threats he'd made. With each answer, Clara felt something loosening in her chest. The truth, spoken aloud in a room full of witnesses, had power. It made her real again. Made her choices matter. Then it was Robert Kensington's turn. He approached the witness stand with the confidence of a man who'd destroyed 1,000 testimonies. Miss Moreau, you've painted quite a dramatic picture of my client, a monster who controlled you, threatened you, terrorized you, and yet you stayed with him for 18 months. Yes. You attended charity galas on his arm. You smiled for photographers. You planned an elaborate wedding. You certainly didn't look like a woman in fear for her safety. That's what Victor taught me to do. Perform. Pretend everything was perfect. Or perhaps everything was perfect until you discovered your fiancé's infidelity and decided to punish him for it. Patricia stood. Objection. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning. Sustained. Mr. Kensington, ask questions or sit down. Kensington smiled, unfazed. Miss Moreau, isn't it true that you only began claiming abuse and criminal activity after you discovered Mr. Rinaldi with your cousin? No. I began documenting his criminal activity 8 months ago. His affair with Gabrielle simply confirmed what I already knew, that he had no genuine care for me, that I was nothing but a possession to him. A possession he lavished with gifts, jewelry, luxury accommodations. Hardly the treatment of someone uncared for. Things aren't the same as care. Victor gave me expensive presents the way someone might accessorize a car, to make me look better on his arm, to demonstrate his wealth, never because he wanted me to be happy. Kensington pulled out a photograph. Your Honor, I'd like to enter this into evidence. It's a photo from a charity event 3 months ago. Does this look like a woman being held prisoner, Ms. Moreau? Clara looked at the image. She remembered that night. The gala for children's literacy, one of Victor's favorite causes because it made him look philanthropic. In the photo, she stood beside him in a couture gown, smiling brilliantly. Victor's hand rested possessively on her waist. She also remembered what had happened an hour before that photo was taken. Victor's rage when she'd suggested wearing a different dress than the one he'd selected. The way he'd gripped her arm hard enough to bruise, his voice deadly calm as he explained that she would wear what he chose, behave as he directed, and smile prettily while doing it. Or her father would find his campaign donations mysteriously drying up right before a crucial election. That's a photograph of me performing, Clara said steadily, of me doing what I was told to do to keep the people I loved safe. If you look closely at my left arm, you can see the edge of a bruise that Victor left when he grabbed me during an argument earlier that evening. Kensington moved on quickly. You claim my client threatened your father's career. Do you have any proof of these alleged threats? I have recordings of 3 separate conversations where Victor explicitly stated what would happen if I tried to leave him. Financial ruin for my father's campaign, fabricated evidence of corruption, leaked stories to damage his reputation. Convenient that you just happened to be recording these conversations. Not convenient, calculated. I knew I'd need proof. I knew no one would believe me without it. Or perhaps you recorded carefully edited conversations spliced together to sound threatening when they were actually innocent discussions taken out of context. Patricia rose again. Your Honor, the defense has had full access to the recordings. Our forensic analysis confirms they're unedited and authentic. This line of questioning is purely for harassment. Judge Brennan nodded. Mr. Kensington, move on. But Kensington wasn't finished trying to destroy Clara's credibility. He questioned her about her relationship with Ethan, implying she'd been having an affair while engaged to Victor. He suggested she'd fabricated evidence because she wanted Ethan's money. He painted her as a gold digger who'd gotten cold feet about marrying a man with a complicated past and decided to ruin him rather than simply walk away. Clara answered each accusation calmly, her voice never rising, her composure never cracking. She'd known this was coming. Ethan had prepared her for exactly this kind of attack, and she'd decided she wouldn't let Victor's lawyer shame her for the crime of trying to survive. Mr. Kensington, she said finally, after 20 minutes of increasingly hostile questioning, you can paint me however you want, Scorned fiancé, gold digger, liar. But the evidence doesn't care about your narrative. The financial records showing money laundering are real. The testimony from Victor's former associates is real. The recordings are real. My fear was real. And nothing you say here today can change those facts. For the first time, Kensington looked uncertain. He glanced at Victor, who gave a tiny shake of his head. No further questions, Your Honor. Patricia conducted a brief redirect, allowing Claire to clarify a few points Kensington had tried to muddy. Then Judge Brennan excused her from the witness stand. Claire's legs felt shaky as she stood, but she walked past Victor with her head high. She didn't look at him, didn't give him the satisfaction of her attention. He was nothing to her now except evidence in a criminal case. The rest of the hearing was technical. Agent Chen testified about the FBI's investigation. A forensic accountant walked through Victor's money laundering scheme. Marco Santini, Victor's former lieutenant, took the stand via video link from protective custody and detailed orders Victor had given for intimidation, violence, and murder. With each testimony, Victor's empire crumbled a little more. His lawyers objected and argued and tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case, but the evidence was overwhelming. By the time Judge Brennan called for a recess, even Kensington looked defeated. Clara sat in the gallery between Ethan and her father, exhausted but grimly satisfied. She'd done it, testified truthfully, maintained her composure, refused to be intimidated. Whatever happened next, she'd told her truth. During the recess, they retreated to the conference room. Clara drank water with shaking hands while Patricia reviewed her notes. You were perfect up there, Patricia said. Calm, credible, unshakable. Kensington tried every trick in his arsenal, and you didn't budge. I wanted to, Clara admitted. When he implied I was lying about the threats, about the control, I wanted to scream at him. But you didn't. That's what matters. Juries trust composure. They trust someone who can take aggressive questioning without falling apart. This wasn't the actual trial, though, just the preliminary hearing, which we're going to win. Judge Brennan isn't going to dismiss a case this solid. We'll proceed to trial, probably in 6 to 8 weeks. And based on what I saw today, I think we have an excellent chance of conviction. Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. 6 to 8 weeks. She could survive that. Could prepare for another round of testimony, another battle with Victor's lawyers. As long as she knew there was an endpoint, she could endure anything. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went carefully neutral. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Agent Chen asked. My security team just intercepted communications between Victor's remaining lieutenants. They're planning something for tonight, some kind of retaliation. Clara's blood went cold. Retaliation against who? You. And anyone they think helped you. Ethan's eyes met hers. They're going after your father, Rachel, and several of the FBI agents who arrested Victor. They want to send a message that testifying against Victor Rinaldi has consequences. Senator Moreau stood abruptly. They're threatening my daughter because she told the truth? They're desperate, Agent Chen said grimly. Victor's entire organization is collapsing. The people still loyal to him are trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Intimidating witnesses is their best play. Then we protect the witnesses, Patricia said. Get everyone to safe locations, increase security, make it impossible for them to follow through on these threats. I've already activated protective protocols for everyone on the target list, Ethan said. Rachel's being moved to a secure location as we speak. Extra agents are being assigned to Senator Moreau's detail. But Clara, he turned to her. You're the primary target. They're planning to grab you tonight, make an example of you. To force me to recant my testimony. Or to punish you for giving it. Either way, we need to assume they're serious. Clara thought about Victor in the courtroom, that cold smile, that absolute certainty that he still controlled her fate. Of course he'd ordered this. Even from jail, even facing overwhelming evidence, he believed he could terrorize her into submission. He was wrong. Let them try, Clara said quietly. I have the best security team in the country protecting me. I have federal agents watching my back, and I'm done being afraid of Victor Rinaldi. Clara, her father started. No, Dad, I'm not backing down. I'm not recanting. I'm not hiding for the rest of my life because Victor's thugs made threats. I stood up in court today and told the truth. I'm not going to let anyone make me regret that. Ethan studied her for a long moment. You're sure? Completely. Then we do this smart. Enhanced security, controlled movements, zero unnecessary risks. You don't leave the safe house without a full detail. You don't communicate with anyone except through secure channels. And if things escalate, you get me somewhere safe and let the professionals handle it. I'm brave, not stupid. A bailiff appeared in the doorway. Judge Brennan is ready to render her decision. They filed back into the courtroom. Clara took her seat, Ethan solid and steady beside her. Victor watched from the defense table, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burning with rage. Judge Brennan entered, and everyone rose. When she sat, she wasted no time on preamble. I've reviewed the evidence presented today and the supporting documentation provided by both the prosecution and defense. The testimony of Ms. Moreau is credible and corroborated by substantial physical evidence. The financial records clearly demonstrate a pattern of illegal activity. The witness statements paint a consistent picture of organized criminal enterprise. She looked directly at Victor. Mr. Rinaldi, there is more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges. You will remain in custody without bail until such time as the trial concludes. Preliminary hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. Victor's lawyers immediately began objecting, demanding appeal, insisting their client wasn't a flight risk. But Judge Brennan was already leaving the bench, and the bailiffs were already moving to escort Victor back to holding. As they led him past Clara's row, Victor stopped, turned, looked directly at her with eyes full of dark promise. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You're mine, Clara. You'll always be mine. And when I get out of this cage, I'm going to remind you exactly what happens to things that belong to me when they try to run." "Keep moving, Rinaldi," a bailiff ordered, but Victor held Clara's gaze for another heartbeat. "You made a mistake marrying Blackwell. You made a bigger mistake thinking you could testify against me and walk away clean. I'm going to take everything from you, your freedom, your safety, everyone you love. And when you're broken and begging, I'll decide whether you deserve mercy." Ethan rose from his seat, his hand moving toward Victor, but Agent Chen stopped him with a gesture. She stepped directly into Victor's line of sight, blocking his view of Clara. "Make all the threats you want, Rinaldi. Every word is being documented as witness intimidation. You're just digging your hole deeper." Victor smiled. "I don't make threats, Agent Chen. I make promises. Ask anyone who's ever crossed me. They'll tell you, if they're still alive to talk." The bailiffs hauled him away finally, but his words lingered in the courtroom like poison. Clara sat frozen, her earlier courage evaporating under the weight of his certainty. He meant it, every word. He would come for her if he got the chance. Would destroy everything she cared about to punish her for choosing herself. "Clara." Ethan's hand settled on her shoulder. "Look at me." She turned, meeting his steady gray eyes. "He's trying to scare you. That's all he has left. Words. He can't actually hurt you. We won't let him." "You heard what he said. When he gets out, he's not getting out. The evidence is overwhelming. He'll be convicted, and he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Those threats are the last desperate gasps of a man who's lost everything." Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen Victor operate for 18 months, seen him destroy people who crossed him, ruin careers with a phone call, make problems disappear with terrifying efficiency. Words like prison and conviction seemed flimsy against that kind of ruthless power. Her father pulled her into another embrace as they left the courtroom. "You were so brave today, sweetheart. So strong." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I just painted a target on everyone I love." "You exposed a criminal. That's exactly what you should feel proud of, not guilty about." Victor Rinaldi made his own choices. The consequences are his to bear. They exited through a side door to avoid the media circus at the front entrance. Ethan's security team had 3 SUVs waiting, engines running, forming a protective convoy. Clara climbed into the middle vehicle, bracketed by Ethan and Agent Chen, feeling like a prisoner being transported rather than a free woman. Maybe that's what she'd always be now. Free in theory, but trapped by Victor's shadow. Afraid to live normally because somewhere out there, his organization was planning ways to hurt her. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan said quietly, "This gets better." I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but time and distance help. Once Victor's convicted, once his organization is fully dismantled, you'll be able to breathe again. How long does that take? For most people, months, sometimes years. Trauma doesn't follow a schedule. He paused. But you're not most people, Clara. You planned an escape for 6 months, married a stranger to protect yourself, and stood up in court today against one of the most dangerous men in New York. If anyone can rebuild from this, it's you. Clara leaned her head against the window, watching the city pass by. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives, going to work, meeting friends for coffee, planning futures that didn't involve criminal trials and death threats. She wanted that. Wanted normal so badly it ached. But normal would have to wait. First, she had to survive what came next. And based on the look in Victor's eyes as he'd made his threats, what came next was going to be a war. The war started 3 hours after they returned to the safe house. Clara was in the kitchen attempting to eat dinner she couldn't taste when Ethan's phone exploded with alerts. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and his expression went from calm to lethal in the space of a heartbeat. When? He demanded. How many? Is she secure? Clara set down her fork, her appetite vanishing completely. What happened? Ethan held up one hand, still listening. Keep her there. Triple the perimeter. I want eyes on every approach and background checks on anyone within 100 yards. He ended the call and turned to Clara, his voice carefully controlled. Rachel's fine, but Victor's people just tried to grab her outside her apartment. The room tilted. Is she hurt? No. My security team intercepted them before they got close. 3 men, armed, with zip ties and a van. They're in FBI custody now. Ethan moved to the window, scanning the street outside with the kind of alertness that reminded Clara he'd been a soldier long before he became a billionaire. This is escalating faster than we anticipated. Victor's not waiting for trial. He's making his move now. Agent Chen arrived 20 minutes later with 2 additional agents and a tactical assessment that made Clara's blood run cold. Victor's remaining lieutenants had coordinated attacks on 5 different targets simultaneously. Rachel, 2 FBI agents who'd participated in his arrest, a prosecutor who'd agreed to testify about previous cases, and Clara's father's campaign office. They're sending a message, Agent Chen explained, spreading photographs across the dining table. Anyone who helps build a case against Victor Rinaldi will pay the price. They failed tonight because we were prepared, but they'll try again. My father? Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. Is secure. We moved him to an undisclosed location with a full protective detail. He's not happy about it, but he's safe. Clara stared at the photographs. Men in tactical gear being arrested, weapons confiscated. A white van with blackout windows that had been intended to transport Rachel to somewhere unspeakable. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was Victor's empire striking back with violence and desperation. What do we do? She asked. We accelerate the timeline, Patricia Alvarez said, entering the dining room with a stack of legal documents. We can't wait 6 to 8 weeks for trial. Every day Victor's organization remains operational is another day they can hurt people. I'm petitioning the court for an expedited trial schedule, 4 weeks maximum. Can you do that? With evidence this strong and active threats against witnesses, Judge Brennan will allow it. The question is whether we can be ready. Patricia looked at Clara. Which means more preparation, more testimony, more time in that courtroom facing Victor and his lawyers. Can you handle that? Clara thought about Rachel nearly kidnapped, her father in hiding, federal agents risking their lives because Clara had chosen to speak up. She thought about every woman who'd ever been trapped by a man like Victor, too afraid to fight back because the cost seemed too high. I can handle it, she said. Whatever it takes to put him away permanently. The next 3 weeks became a blur of preparation and paranoia. Clara lived in the safe house, rarely leaving except for strategy sessions with Patricia and her legal team. Ethan's security protocols were suffocating: armed guards, restricted communication, background checks on anyone who came within 50 feet of her. But every time Clara felt frustrated by the restrictions, she remembered that van outside Rachel's apartment and accepted the cage that kept her breathing. She saw her father twice, both times in secure federal facilities. He looked older each visit, the stress of his daughter's situation carving new lines into his distinguished face. But he never suggested she recant her testimony, never implied this was too high a price to pay for justice. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said during their second visit, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Standing up to a monster, refusing to be intimidated. That's the daughter she raised. I'm terrified every single day, Dad. Courage isn't the absence of fear, sweetheart. It's doing the right thing despite the fear. You've got that in spades." Rachel called regularly, her voice strained but determined. She'd moved in with her sister in Connecticut, accepting protection she clearly resented but understood was necessary. "I can't believe I'm in witness protection because I was your maid of honor," she said during one call, trying for humor and landing somewhere near hysteria. "This is insane, Clara." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you're caught up in this." "Don't apologize. You saved yourself. That's not something to be sorry about. I wish you'd trusted me sooner. I could have helped. I couldn't risk it. Victor had people everywhere." "Does he still?" That was the question that kept Clara awake at night. Despite the arrest, despite the crumbling organization, Victor's influence seemed to extend beyond reason. Two witnesses who'd agreed to testify suddenly developed cold feet. A key piece of financial evidence disappeared from a supposedly secure FBI server. Small acts of sabotage that suggested Victor's reach extended further than anyone had anticipated. "He's got someone on the inside," Ethan said during a tense strategy meeting with Agent Chen and Patricia. "Someone feeding him information, executing orders. We need to find them before the trial starts." "We're investigating," Agent Chen said grimly, "but Victor's been cultivating sources for years." "It could be anyone, a clerk, an agent, even someone in the prosecutor's office." Patricia's expression hardened. "Then we assume everything leaks. We prepare for Victor knowing our strategy, our witnesses, our evidence. We build a case so airtight that even with inside information, he can't escape it." The work consumed Clara. Hours of testimony rehearsal, reviewing documents until her eyes burned, preparing for every possible attack Victor's defense might launch. Patricia was relentless, attacking Clara's credibility with the same viciousness Kensington would employ, forcing her to defend every choice, every timeline, every piece of evidence. "I need you unshakable," Patricia explained after a particularly brutal practice session that left Clara in tears. "I need you to have answered every ugly question in this room, so that when Kensington asks them in court, you're ready. I know it's hard. I know it feels like I'm attacking you, but I'm preparing you to survive." Ethan was different from Patricia. Where she attacked, he supported. He sat with Clara during late nights when panic attacks made breathing difficult. He made her eat when stress killed her appetite. He never demanded she be stronger than she felt, just offered steady presence when strength failed. "Tell me about after," Clara said one night, 3 days before the trial. They were in the safe house living room, Ethan reviewing security reports while Clara pretended to read a book she couldn't focus on. "Tell me what happens when this is over." Ethan looked up, setting aside his tablet. "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know. Normal life seems impossible. How do I just go back to being a person after this?" "You don't go back. You go forward. You build something new from the pieces that survived." He paused, considering his words. "When I left military intelligence, I thought I'd never stop seeing threats everywhere. Every crowd was a potential ambush. Every stranger was a possible enemy. It took years before I could walk into a restaurant without calculating exit routes. Does it ever stop completely? No, but it becomes background noise instead of screaming static. You learn to live with it." Ethan moved to sit beside her on the couch, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching. "What do you want, Clara? Not what you think you should want, not what makes sense. What does your gut tell you?" Clara closed her eyes, trying to imagine a future beyond courtrooms and safe houses. "I want to help people, other people trapped like I was. I want to use what I learned, what I survived, to make it easier for them to escape." "That's a good start." "And I want—" She hesitated, the words feeling too vulnerable to speak aloud. "I want to figure out who I am without Victor's voice in my head, without fear making every decision. I want to know what I actually like, what I actually want, without calculating whether it's safe or strategic or acceptable." "That's the work of healing," It takes time. What if I'm too damaged? What if I can't ever be normal again? Ethan's hand found hers, his grip warm and solid. Then you'll be extraordinary instead. Normal is overrated anyway. Despite the fear, despite the constant threat, Clara felt something shift between them during those weeks. The marriage that had started as legal strategy became something more complicated. Not romance exactly, though she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. More like partnership. Two people facing darkness together, learning each other's strengths and vulnerabilities in the process. Late one night, unable to sleep, Clara found Ethan in the kitchen making tea. He didn't seem surprised to see her, just pulled down a second mug and poured for both of them. "Can't stop thinking about tomorrow?" he asked. Tomorrow was the final preparation session before trial started. Patricia wanted one more run-through of Clara's testimony, one more chance to shore up weak points before they faced Victor in court. "I keep thinking about what he said, that I'm his, that I'll always be his." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm mug. What if he's right? What if no matter how many years he spends in prison, he still owns a part of me? He doesn't own anything unless you give it to him, and you've already taken back your power, Clara. You just haven't fully accepted it yet. How do you know? Because 3 weeks ago you testified against the most dangerous man in New York. You looked him in the eye and refused to be intimidated. That's not a woman who's owned by anyone. I was terrified. Terrified and brave. Those things coexist. Ethan set down his mug, his gray eyes serious. I've been doing this work for 5 years. I've helped dozens of people escape situations like yours. And I can tell within the first conversation whether they're going to make it, whether they've got the core of steel necessary to rebuild. You've got it, Clara. You just need to trust yourself. I trusted myself with Victor. Look how that turned out. You trusted the performance Victor gave you, the man he pretended to be. That's not a failure of your judgment. That's the success of his manipulation. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that she wasn't fundamentally broken, just temporarily damaged. But doubt was Victor's last gift to her, the lingering poison of his control making her question every instinct. The night before trial, Clara's father was allowed a final visit. They sat in the secure conference room, federal agents stationed outside, and he held her hands like she was still his little girl and not a 28-year-old woman about to testify against a mob boss. "I want you to know I'm proud of you," Senator Moreau said. "Win or lose tomorrow, guilty or not guilty, you stood up and told the truth. That takes more courage than most people have. What if the jury doesn't believe me? What if Kensington's attacks work, and they think I'm just a scorned woman making up stories? Then we appeal. We try again. We keep fighting until justice is served. But Clara, I've read the evidence. I've seen what Patricia's built. This case is solid. Victor Rinaldi is going to prison. And if he isn't, if somehow he walks free?" Her father's expression hardened. "Then I will use every resource, every connection, every favor I'm owed to make sure you're protected. He will not hurt you again. I promise you that." They embraced for a long moment, and Clara let herself be small again. Be someone's daughter instead of someone's victim or someone's witness. Just for a minute, she let herself feel protected instead of always protecting herself. When her father left, Ethan appeared with dinner neither of them would eat, and a quiet strength that had become essential to Clara's survival. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "No, but I'm going anyway. That's the only kind of ready that matters." The trial started on a cold Monday morning in March. Clara wore a simple gray suit, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional, credible. Nothing Victor could use to paint her as vindictive or unstable. The courthouse was a fortress. Security checkpoints, metal detectors, armed officers everywhere. Victor's remaining supporters had threatened protests, violence, chaos designed to disrupt the proceedings. Instead, they'd been met with overwhelming force that made disruption impossible. Clara took her seat in the gallery beside Ethan, watching as the courtroom filled. Jury members filing into the box, 12 ordinary people who would decide Victor's fate. Prosecutors arranging documents with careful precision. Defense attorneys conferring in urgent whispers. And Victor himself, dressed in an expensive suit despite his custody status, looking every inch the successful businessman rather than the criminal monster. He caught Clara's eye across the courtroom and smiled. That same predatory smile from the preliminary hearing. The smile that said he still believed he'd win, still believed she'd break, still believed he owned her. Clara smiled back, not with warmth or challenge, but with certainty. She'd survived his worst already. Whatever happened in this courtroom, she would survive that too. Judge Brennan entered and the trial officially began. Opening statements painted vastly different pictures of Victor Rinaldi. Patricia presented him as a ruthless crime boss who'd built an empire on violence, corruption, and fear. Kensington painted him as a legitimate businessman targeted by vindictive ex-fiancée and overzealous prosecutors. The first week was testimony from FBI agents, forensic accountants, former associates, each one building the foundation of evidence against Victor, each one systematically dismantled by Kensington's aggressive cross-examination. The defense strategy became clear: attack every witness's credibility, suggest evidence was fabricated or misinterpreted, paint Victor as a victim of circumstance rather than architect of crime. Clara watched from the gallery, taking notes, preparing for her own testimony. She was scheduled for the second week, the prosecution's key witness, the one who could provide insider perspective on Victor's operation. The night before she testified, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced the safe house, reviewing her preparation, imagining every possible question. Ethan found her at 3 a.m. in the kitchen, still fully dressed, surrounded by documents. "You need rest," he said gently. "I need to be perfect tomorrow. I can't mess this up." "You won't mess up. You've prepared more than anyone I've ever seen. You know this case better than Patricia does at this point." "What if I freeze? What if I get up there and Victor looks at me and I just stop functioning?" Ethan knelt beside her chair, his hands covering hers. "Then you take a breath. Look at me in the gallery and remember that you're not alone, that you have an entire team behind you, that you've already survived the worst he could do." He paused. "And if you absolutely cannot continue, we ask for a recess. No one expects you to be superhuman, Clara." "Patricia does. Patricia expects you to be prepared and honest, that's all. The rest, the strength, the courage, the ability to face him, that's already in you. You've already proven that." Clara leaned into him, letting his steadiness anchor her. Over the past 3 weeks, this had become natural, turning to Ethan when fear overwhelmed her, accepting comfort without calculating the cost. Their marriage might have started as strategy, but somewhere along the way it had become something more real than either of them had anticipated. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of this, for being exactly who I needed." "Always," Ethan said simply, and Clara believed him. She took the stand the next morning with shaking hands and absolute determination. Patricia walked her through her testimony with the careful precision they'd rehearsed dozens of times. Clara's voice remained steady as she described Victor's criminal activities, the threats he'd made, the systematic isolation and control. She provided dates, specifics, corroborating details that matched other witnesses' accounts. The jury listened with rapt attention. Several took notes. A few looked at Victor with expressions ranging from disgust to disbelief. Clara focused on Patricia, on the facts, on telling the truth exactly as it had happened. Then Kensington stood for cross-examination, and the real battle began. He started gentle, almost sympathetic. "Miss Moreau, you've testified that you were afraid of my client, and yet you planned an elaborate escape instead of simply going to the authorities. Why is that?" "Because Victor had connections within law enforcement. He told me about paying off officers, judges, prosecutors. I didn't know who I could trust." "So you trusted Mr. Blackwell, a man you'd just met?" "I researched his background extensively. His work helping people escape dangerous situations is well documented and verified. Yes, I trusted him." "Convenient that he's also a billionaire. Did his wealth factor into your decision to marry him?" Patricia objected. "Relevance, Your Honor?" "I'm establishing the witness's motivations," Kensington argued. Judge Brennan considered. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Kensington." Clara met Kensington's eyes. "I married Ethan Blackwell for legal protection. His wealth was irrelevant. If he'd been a lawyer or a security guard or anyone else who could provide the same protection, I would have made the same choice. But he wasn't just anyone. He was a billionaire who could offer you a lifestyle even more luxurious than what my client provided. I didn't want luxury. I wanted freedom. Those are very different things. Kensington shifted tactics. You've testified that my client threatened your father's career. Can you provide specific examples of these threats? Clara had prepared for this. She detailed 3 separate conversations, providing exact dates, locations, and Victor's precise words. With each example, she watched Kensington's expression tighten. The defense had clearly hoped she'd be vague, emotional, easy to discredit. Instead, she was specific, calm, methodical. You seem to have very detailed memories of these conversations, Kensington observed. I recorded them. As I testified earlier, I knew I'd need proof. How convenient that you just happened to be recording at exactly the right moments. It wasn't convenience, it was planning. Once I understood how dangerous Victor was, I recorded every significant conversation we had. I have over 60 hours of audio documentation. That clearly wasn't what Kensington wanted to hear. He moved on to her relationship with Gabrielle, trying to paint the affair as the real motivation for Clara's testimony. But Clara refused to be baited. Victor's infidelity confirmed what I already knew, that he didn't actually care about me as a person. But my testimony isn't about his affair, it's about his crimes. The two are separate issues. Yet you didn't discover his crimes until after you discovered his infidelity. That's incorrect. I discovered his criminal activities 8 months before the wedding. I discovered his affair with my cousin 4 hours before the ceremony. The timeline is well documented. Kensington tried for 2 more hours to shake Clara's testimony, to find inconsistencies, to make her emotional or confused. But Clara had lived this story, had documented it meticulously, had prepared for exactly this kind of attack. She answered every question calmly, referred to specific evidence when challenged, and refused to let him twist her words into something they weren't. Finally, looking frustrated and defeated, Kensington said, "No further questions." Patricia's redirect was brief, just a few questions to clarify points Kensington had muddied, to let Clara reaffirm her core testimony. Then Judge Brennan excused her from the stand. Clara walked past Victor on legs that barely held her weight. She'd done it. Testified completely, maintained credibility, provided the jury with everything they needed to understand who Victor really was. As she passed his table, Victor leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Enjoy your little victory. When I walk out of here free, the first thing I'm going to do is remind you who you belong to." Clara stopped, turned, looked at him directly for the first time since taking the stand. "I don't belong to you. I never did. And you're not walking out of here free. You're going to prison, Victor, for the rest of your life. And there's nothing you can do to stop it." She continued to her seat before the bailiff could intervene, before Victor could respond. Ethan stood as she approached, and she walked straight into his arms, letting him hold her while the courtroom buzzed with reaction to what had just happened. "You were magnificent," Ethan murmured against her hair. "Absolutely magnificent." Clara didn't feel magnificent. She felt wrung out, exhausted, hollowed by the effort of facing Victor and refusing to break. But she'd survived. That was enough. The trial continued for another week. More witnesses, more evidence, more legal maneuvering. The defense called character witnesses who swore Victor was a pillar of the community. The prosecution called victims who described the violence his organization had inflicted. Day by day, the case built toward conclusion. Finally, closing arguments. Patricia's was passionate and precise, laying out the overwhelming evidence of Victor's guilt. Kensington's was emotional and desperate, painting Victor as a successful businessman destroyed by vengeful ex-fiancé and ambitious prosecutors. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Clara spent them in the safe house, unable to eat or sleep or think about anything except 12 strangers deciding her future. If they found Victor guilty, she could start rebuilding. If they acquitted him, she'd spend the rest of her life running. Ethan stayed close during those 48 hours, offering quiet support and refusing to let her spiral completely into panic. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it," he said more than once. "Together." The call came at 4:17 p.m. on the second day. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Clara sat between Ethan and her father, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. Victor sat at the defense table looking confident, relaxed, certain of his victory. The jury filed in. Clara tried to read their faces, their body language, searching for any hint of what they'd decided, but they were carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Judge Brennan called the court to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood, a middle-aged woman in a cardigan who'd taken copious notes throughout the trial. "We have, Your Honor." "How do you find?" Clara held her breath. Beside her, Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing gently. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. "On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. Judge Brennan's gavel cracked like thunder, demanding order. But Clara barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. Guilty. "On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty." Victor's confident expression cracked. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty." Clara's father pulled her against his chest, his shoulders shaking. "Guilty." The forewoman continued through all 47 charges. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty." An unbroken litany of condemnation that dismantled Victor's empire one verdict at a time. When it was finished, Judge Brennan set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later and adjourned. Bailiffs surrounded Victor, who'd gone very pale and very still. His lawyers were already talking about appeals, about procedural errors, about fighting this conviction. But Clara could see in Victor's eyes that he knew. It was over. He'd lost. As they led him away, Victor looked at Clara one final time. Not with the predatory confidence of before, but with pure hatred. The look of a man who'd been beaten and knew it. Clara met his gaze without flinching. She'd won. Against all odds, against his power and connections and violence, she'd won. Patricia appeared beside her, professional composure cracking into genuine emotion. "We did it. Guilty on all counts. He's going away forever." "How long?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. "With these charges? Life without parole. Victor Rinaldi will die in prison." The words should have brought relief. Instead, Clara felt nothing but exhaustion. The battle was over. She'd survived. Now she had to figure out how to actually live. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions she didn't answer. Ethan's security team created a protective bubble that got her to the SUV safely. As they pulled away from the courthouse, Clara watched it recede in the side mirror, this building that had consumed weeks of her life. "It's really over," she said quietly. "The trial is over," Ethan corrected. "The healing is just beginning." Clara leaned against his shoulder, letting herself feel the weight of victory mixed with the exhaustion of war. She'd destroyed a criminal empire, testified against a monster, and survived with her truth intact. Now came the harder part, learning to live without fear, learning to trust again, learning who Clara Moreau actually was when she wasn't defined by survival. But for the first time in 18 months, she had the freedom to find out, and that made everything worth it. The 3 weeks between verdict and sentencing passed in a strange, suspended reality. Clara remained in the safe house even though Victor was behind bars because his organization, what remained of it, was still operational. Agent Chen warned that desperate men made desperate choices, and Victor's remaining loyalists might see his sentencing as their last chance to strike. But something had shifted after the guilty verdict. The phone calls intercepted by Ethan's security team changed in tone. Less talk of retaliation, more discussion of self-preservation. Victor's empire was collapsing in earnest now, his associates scrambling to cut deals with prosecutors, to distance themselves from the sinking ship. "They're turning on him," Agent Chen explained during one of her regular briefings. "We've had 6 people approach us offering testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. The organization is eating itself alive." Clara should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she felt hollow. The trial had consumed so much energy, so much focus, that its conclusion left a void she didn't know how to fill. She'd spent 18 months surviving Victor, then 6 months planning her escape, then another month fighting for his conviction. Now that the battle was over, she didn't know who to be. Ethan noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "You're drifting," he said one evening, finding her staring out the window at nothing in particular. "You did that yesterday too. Just standing somewhere, looking at nothing." "I don't know what to do with myself. For 2 years, every decision I made was about survival. Now I don't have to survive anymore. I just have to live. And I don't remember how." Ethan settled beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to feel without crowding. What did you like before Victor? What made you happy? Clara tried to remember. I taught literacy classes at a community center. I read constantly, novels, history, poetry. I had this whole friend group that would meet for brunch every Sunday and argue about books and politics and terrible dating stories. She laughed, but it came out bitter. That person feels like someone I made up, like she never actually existed. She existed. She's just been buried under trauma for a while. But you can find her again if you want to. What if I don't want to? What if I'm too different now, too damaged to go back to being that naive girl who thought the world was fundamentally safe? Then you become someone new. Someone who's seen darkness but chooses light anyway. Someone who knows how dangerous the world can be but engages with it courageously. Ethan finally reached for her hand, his touch gentle and grounding. You don't have to be who you were, Clara. You just have to decide who you want to be next. The question haunted her through the following days. Who did she want to be? Not Victor's victim. She'd fought too hard to escape that identity. Not just a survivor either, though survival was worth celebrating. Something more. Something purposeful. The answer came during an unexpected conversation with Patricia Alvarez. They met for coffee at a secure location to discuss Clara's victim impact statement for the sentencing hearing. Patricia had come prepared with a template, suggestions, legal guidance. But halfway through reviewing it, she set down her notes and studied Clara with sharp attention. Can I ask you something off the record? Of course. What are you going to do now, after sentencing, after all of this is truly finished? Clara had been asked this question a dozen times. Usually she deflected, changed the subject, admitted she didn't know. But something about Patricia's directness invited honesty. I want to help people, other people trapped like I was. I don't know exactly how yet, but I know I can't just move on, pretend it never happened, build some normal life and ignore that there are women out there right now experiencing what I went through. Patricia smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. I was hoping you'd say that, because I have a proposal for you. The proposal was ambitious and a little terrifying. Patricia wanted to establish a specialized unit within the prosecutor's office focused on cases involving intimate partner violence within organized crime. A unit that would combine legal expertise with lived experience, providing support for victims who wanted to testify but needed protection and resources to do so safely. Your testimony was extraordinary, Patricia explained, not just because of the evidence you provided, but because you understood the psychology of control. You could articulate why you stayed, why you didn't report earlier, why escape seemed impossible. That perspective is invaluable. We have dozens of cases where victims refuse to cooperate because they don't believe we can protect them. But if someone who survived what you survived could tell them it's possible, that could change everything. You want me to work for the prosecutor's office? I want you to help us build something that didn't exist for you, a comprehensive support system for victims who want to fight back but don't know how. Patricia paused. Obviously, this isn't something you'd start immediately. You need time to heal, to process, to figure out your own path. But when you're ready, if you're interested, I'd like to work with you on this. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Purpose. Direction. A way to transform her worst experience into something that could help others. I'm interested. Very interested. Good. Then let's talk after sentencing, once Victor's officially put away and you've had time to breathe. Clara left that meeting feeling more grounded than she had in weeks. She had a direction now, something to work toward that wasn't just about escaping or surviving, but about building something meaningful. She told Ethan about Patricia's proposal that night over dinner. Neither of them cooked. They'd both given up pretending either was domestic and just ordered takeout. He listened carefully, asking questions, considering the implications. It's going to be difficult, he said finally. Emotionally exhausting. You'll be reliving your trauma regularly, hearing other women's stories that might trigger your own memories. Are you sure you want to take that on? I'm not sure of anything, but I know I can't just forget what happened to me. And if talking about it, using what I learned, can help even one person escape faster than I did, that seems worth the difficulty. Ethan's smile was warm with approval, and something deeper Clara was beginning to recognize as affection. Then I'll support you however I can. resources, security, legal expertise, whatever you need. You've already done so much. You can't just keep, I can and I will. We're partners, Clara. In the legal sense, yes, but also in the practical sense. Your safety, your well-being, your ability to build the life you want, those things matter to me. Clara set down her chopsticks, studying the man across from her. Ethan Blackwell, who'd married a desperate stranger to help her escape, who'd risked his business, his safety, his entire life to support her fight against Victor, who'd spent the past 2 months providing steady, patient support without demanding anything in return. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you care so much? I know you said you help people, that this is what you do, but this feels like more than professional obligation. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes distant with memory. I told you once that I started this work because someone I cared about needed help and didn't get it in time. What I didn't tell you was that person was my mother. Clara's breath caught. My father was a successful attorney, well-respected, charming, connected. He was also violently abusive behind closed doors. My mother tried to leave twice. Both times he used his connections to destroy the cases against him, to paint her as unstable, to make it legally impossible for her to escape with me and my sister. His voice remained carefully controlled, but Clara heard the pain underneath. She died when I was 19. Car accident, officially. But I've always believed she was running again, that she was so desperate to escape she wasn't paying attention to the road. Ethan, I spent years being angry, at her for not fighting harder, at myself for not being old enough to protect her, at a system that failed her repeatedly. Then I joined the military, learned about tactics and strategy and how to actually help people instead of just being angry. When I left and started my security company, I made a promise. No one else would die because they didn't have the resources to escape. No one else would feel as hopeless as my mother must have felt. Clara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you lost her that way. I'm sorry you know what she went through, but I'm grateful you survived it, and I'm honored I could help you do what she never got the chance to do, fight back and win. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands across takeout containers, two people shaped by violence and loss choosing connection anyway. Clara realized with sudden clarity that what she felt for Ethan wasn't gratitude or obligation or even the simple affection of friendship. It was something deeper, more complicated, more real than anything she'd felt for Victor during their entire relationship. What happens to us? She asked. To this marriage? After sentencing, after things settle, when I don't need legal protection anymore? Ethan's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. That depends on what you want. We can annul it quietly. Remain friends, go our separate ways with good memories. He paused, his eyes searching hers. Or we could see if this thing between us, this partnership that started as strategy, could become something more. On your timeline, your terms, no pressure. I don't know if I'm capable of healthy relationship right now. Victor broke something in me, my ability to trust, to be vulnerable, to believe someone could want me without wanting to control me. Then we take it slow. We keep being partners. We see where it goes without forcing anything. And if you decide you need space, need to figure yourself out independently, I'll understand that too. Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the steady strength she'd come to rely on. I don't want space. I don't know what I want long term, but I know I want you in my life, however that looks. Then that's enough. For now, it's enough. The sentencing hearing arrived with the weight of finality. Clara woke that morning feeling strange, not nervous exactly, but aware that today marked the official end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. She dressed carefully in a navy dress that made her feel strong and professional. Ethan wore a suit that emphasized his military bearing, and together they looked less like a couple thrown together by circumstance and more like actual partners facing the world as a united front. Her father met them at the courthouse, looking older and more tired than Clara had ever seen him, but fiercely proud. Whatever you say today, whatever you feel, I'm with you, he said, embracing her tightly. The courtroom was less crowded than during the trial. Many of Victor's former associates were conspicuously absent, not wanting to be associated with his downfall. But the people who mattered were there. Agent Chen, Patricia, Rachel, who'd driven down from Connecticut, several of the FBI agents who'd worked the case. Victor was led in wearing prison orange, his expensive suits and careful grooming replaced by the reality of incarceration. He looked diminished somehow, the aura of power and control stripped away to reveal the petty, violent man underneath. When his eyes met Clara's, there was no smile this time, just hatred and the bitter acknowledgement of defeat. Judge Brennan called the hearing to order and invited Clara to present her victim impact statement. Clara walked to the podium on steady legs, the paper in her hands unnecessary because she'd memorized every word. She looked at Victor directly, refusing to let him see fear. Your Honor, for 18 months, I was engaged to Victor Rinaldi. During that time, he systematically isolated me from friends and family, monitored my every movement, threatened the people I loved, and made me believe I had no options except to submit to his control. He told me I belonged to him, that I would always belong to him, that trying to leave would result in consequences I couldn't imagine. Her voice remained steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the courtroom. He was right about the consequences. Leaving him did result in violence, threats, and ongoing danger. But he was wrong about ownership. I never belonged to him. I was a human being who made a mistake in trusting the wrong person, and I paid for that mistake with months of fear and psychological torture. What Victor didn't anticipate was that fear has limits, that control is an illusion, that eventually even the most terrified person will find their breaking point and fight back. She saw Victor's jaw tighten, his hands clench. I'm not asking this court for vengeance. I'm asking for justice, for recognition that what Victor Rinaldi did to me, and to countless others, was criminal. That using fear and violence to control another person is a crime worthy of the maximum penalty. I'm asking that he be held accountable not just for the financial crimes and organized criminal activity, but for the systematic destruction of human autonomy and dignity that was at the heart of his operation. Clara paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I will carry the scars of my time with Victor Rinaldi for the rest of my life. I will struggle with trust, with fear, with the lingering voice in my head that tells me I'm not strong enough to protect myself. But I will also carry the knowledge that I survived, that I fought back, that I won. And every day I live free of his control is a testament to the fact that people like Victor Rinaldi don't get to decide our worth or our future. We decide that ourselves. She looked away from Victor finally, addressing Judge Brennan directly. I ask that you impose the maximum sentence allowed by law, not because I believe it will undo the harm he caused, but because it will prevent him from causing that harm to anyone else. Thank you. Clara returned to her seat between Ethan and her father, both of whom squeezed her hands in silent support. She'd said what needed saying. Now it was up to the judge. Judge Brennan reviewed her notes, her expression grave. Then she looked at Victor, who sat with carefully maintained composure that couldn't hide the fury in his eyes. Mr. Rinaldi, you have been found guilty of 47 separate counts, including racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, witness intimidation, and numerous other charges. The evidence presented at trial demonstrated a pattern of criminal behavior spanning decades. But what strikes me most profoundly is the testimony regarding your systematic abuse of intimate partners, your use of fear and control to manipulate vulnerable people, your absolute lack of remorse for the harm you've caused. Victor's attorney started to object, but Judge Brennan cut him off with a look. I have presided over hundreds of criminal cases. I have sentenced murderers, rapists, terrorists, but rarely have I encountered someone who so thoroughly embodied the concept of evil disguised as respectability. You used your wealth, your connections, your intelligence to build an empire of violence, and you did so while pretending to be a pillar of the community. She closed the file in front of her with decisive finality. On the charge of racketeering, I sentence you to 20 years in federal prison. On the charge of money laundering, 15 years. On conspiracy to commit murder, life without possibility of parole. These sentences will run consecutively. Additionally, I am ordering the forfeiture of all assets connected to your criminal enterprise to be distributed to victims and used to fund programs supporting survivors of domestic violence. The math was simple. Victor Rinaldi would die in prison. There would be no parole, no early release, no possibility of escape. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, powerless and isolated, experiencing a fraction of what he'd inflicted on others. Victor showed no reaction as the sentence was read, but Clara saw his hands tremble slightly before he clenched them into fists. She saw the moment reality truly penetrated, that this was permanent, irreversible, the absolute end of everything he'd built. "Do you have anything to say before I finalize this sentence?" Judge Brennan asked. Victor stood slowly. For a moment, Clara thought he might apologize, might show some fragment of remorse or humanity. Instead, he turned to look directly at her. "This isn't over, Clara. Prison bars won't protect you forever. Eventually—" "Enough!" Judge Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Rinaldi, you are in contempt of court. Bailiffs, remove him, and add witness intimidation to the record. I want that charge prosecuted separately." Bailiffs surrounded Victor, but he kept his eyes locked on Clara as they hauled him toward the door. "You made a mistake. I said remove him. Now." They dragged Victor from the courtroom, still making threats, his voice echoing until the door closed and cut him off. Clara sat frozen, her heart pounding, the taste of fear sharp in her mouth, despite the fact that Victor was the one in chains. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders. "He can't hurt you. Not anymore." Those were just words from a desperate, defeated man. He sounded so certain. "He's going to die in prison, Clara. That's certainty. Everything else is just noise." Patricia appeared beside them, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. "We'll prosecute that final threat. Add more time to his sentence, not that it matters when he already has life without parole. But I want it on record that even in defeat, he remained dangerous. What if he has people on the outside? People who'd act on his orders? His organization is gone. We've arrested or flipped everyone with any real power. The few still loyal to him are too focused on their own legal troubles to carry out revenge plots. You're safe, Clara. Truly safe." Agent Chen confirmed this assessment when she joined them outside the courtroom. "We've been monitoring communications from the prison. Victor's tried to reach out to former associates. Every single one has refused contact. He's toxic now. No one wants to be connected to him." Clara wanted to believe them, wanted to accept that it was truly over, that she could stop looking over her shoulder and scanning crowds for threats. But years of fear didn't dissolve in an instant just because a judge said they should. The weeks following sentencing were strange. Clara remained in the safe house initially, partly because old habits died hard, and partly because she needed time to adjust to the concept of freedom. But gradually, with Ethan's patient support, she began venturing out. First, just short trips with security escorts, coffee shops and bookstores, places that felt safe and public. Then longer excursions. A museum she'd loved before Victor. The community center where she used to teach literacy classes. Each trip was a small reclamation of territory Victor had stolen from her. Rachel visited, and they spent an entire day talking, crying, rebuilding a friendship that had been damaged by Clara's necessary secrets. "I understand why you couldn't tell me," Rachel said. "I hate it, but I understand it. Just promise me, no more secrets. Whatever happens next, we're honest with each other. I promise." Clara's father helped her navigate the media attention that followed the sentencing. Reporters wanted interviews, book deals, television appearances. Clara declined most of them, but she agreed to one carefully controlled interview where she could tell her story on her own terms and hopefully help other women recognize the signs of abusive relationships. The interview aired to massive response. Clara's email filled with messages from women thanking her for speaking up, sharing their own stories, asking for advice. Reading them was overwhelming and healing in equal measure. She wasn't alone. Her experience wasn't unique. And by speaking her truth, she'd given others permission to speak theirs. Patricia's proposal became concrete. They spent weeks designing the specialized unit, securing funding, recruiting staff. Clara would serve as a consultant initially, providing perspective and support without taking on full-time work until she felt ready. The program would offer legal assistance, security resources, psychological support, and most importantly, a path forward for victims who wanted to fight back but didn't know how. "We're calling it the Moreau Initiative," Patricia said during a planning meeting. "If that's okay with you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Her name, attached to something that would help people. Her worst experience transformed into a resource for others. That's more than okay. 3 months after sentencing, Clara and Ethan finally addressed the elephant in the room, their marriage. They sat in the living room of the brownstone, which no longer felt like a safe house, but more like home, drinking wine and carefully not avoiding the conversation any longer. "I've been thinking," Clara started, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "Dangerous habit," Ethan teased gently. "I've been thinking about us, about this marriage that started as a legal strategy, about what it's become." Ethan set down his wine glass, giving her his full attention. "What has it become?" "Something real, at least for me. I know we got married under extraordinary circumstances. I know you didn't sign up for an actual relationship, but somewhere along the way this stopped feeling like pretend and started feeling like something I want to keep." She held her breath, terrified of his response. They'd been dancing around this for months, their partnership deepening into something neither had explicitly named, but saying it aloud made it vulnerable in a way Clara hadn't felt since before Victor. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch as steady and grounding as always. "Clara, I married you to keep you safe. That was the initial motivation. But I fell in love with you somewhere between watching you plan your escape and seeing you take the stand against Victor. Probably earlier, if I'm honest. You asked what this marriage has become. For me, it's become the most real thing in my life." "You love me?" The words came out smaller than Clara intended. "Completely. Probably have since you first looked me in the eye and asked if I'd be willing to marry a woman I barely knew to help her escape a monster. How could I not fall for someone with that kind of courage?" Clara felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked down since Victor first made her afraid. "I love you too. I didn't think I could, didn't think I had anything left to give after Victor took so much. But you never asked me to give anything. You just stood beside me, supported me, let me be broken, and didn't try to fix me. You were never broken, just hurt. There's a difference." They kissed then, for the first time with intent rather than comfort, and it felt like coming home to a place Clara hadn't known existed. Safe and exciting, gentle and passionate, everything a kiss should be when two people choose each other freely. When they pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Ethan said, "So we're doing this? Actually being married instead of just legally married?" "If you want to. If you're willing to be patient while I figure out how to be a healthy partner instead of someone just surviving. I'm willing to be patient forever if that's what you need. But Clara, you're already a healthy partner. You've been one for months. You just haven't been able to see it." They spent the rest of the evening talking about what their future might look like. Keeping the brownstone, which had stopped feeling temporary weeks ago. Clara launching the Moreau initiative while Ethan continued his security work. Building a life together that was theirs by choice, not necessity. "What about kids eventually?" Ethan asked. "Is that something you want?" Clara thought about it. Before Victor, she'd imagined children vaguely someday when life settled down. During her time with him, she'd been grateful she wasn't pregnant, wasn't tied to him through a child. Now, looking at Ethan, she could imagine it again. Eventually, yes. When I'm further along in healing, when I'm confident I can be the kind of parent who teaches strength instead of fear. Then, eventually, it is. A year after the sentencing, Clara stood in front of a crowd of supporters, donors, and media at the official launch of the Moreau initiative. She wore a dress Ethan had helped her choose, not because he wanted to control her appearance, but because she'd asked his opinion and trusted his taste. The distinction mattered. She took the podium and looked out at the assembled faces. Patricia was there, beaming with pride. Agent Chen had come despite her busy schedule. Rachel sat in the front row beside Clara's father, and Ethan stood off to the side, his presence steady and supportive without overshadowing her moment. 2 years ago, Clara began, I was planning to marry a man who I thought loved me. Instead, I discovered he saw me as property to be controlled. I discovered that love and possession are very different things. And I discovered that escaping abuse requires not just courage, but resources, support, and a community willing to believe you. She spoke about the Moreau Initiative's mission, comprehensive support for victims of intimate partner violence within organized crime contexts, legal resources, security assistance, psychological counseling, job training, housing support. Everything Clara wished had existed when she was planning her escape. "We're starting small," she continued, "but our goal is ambitious. We want to create a model that can be replicated nationwide. We want to make sure that no one has to choose between their safety and their survival, that everyone trapped in an abusive relationship has a clear path forward." The applause when she finished was thunderous. Clara stepped down from the podium and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk, to contribute, to help. She handled it with grace she'd rebuilt piece by piece over the past year, answering questions and accepting congratulations while remaining grounded in herself. Ethan appeared at her elbow during a brief lull, offering water and a quiet escape route if she needed it. "You were magnificent up there." I was terrified. Terrified and magnificent, like I said. They'd said that to each other so many times over the past 2 years that it had become something of a private joke. A reminder that fear and courage coexist, that being scared doesn't mean being weak. Later that night, alone in their brownstone that was truly home now, Clara found Ethan in his study reviewing security protocols for the initiative. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him work, feeling gratitude and love in equal measure. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, without looking up, somehow always aware of her presence. "How different my life is from what I imagined 2 years ago. How much better it is." Ethan set aside his tablet and pulled her onto his lap, his arms wrapping around her with the kind of secure affection she'd learned to trust. "Better how?" "I thought happiness meant safety, meant avoiding anything difficult or dangerous. But real happiness is choosing to face difficulty with someone who respects your autonomy. It's building something meaningful from the wreckage of trauma. It's loving someone who sees you as an equal partner instead of a possession." "That's very philosophical for 11 p.m. Clara laughed, the sound easy and genuine. "I'm allowed to be philosophical. I survived a mob boss and launched a nonprofit in the same year. I've earned some philosophical reflection." "Fair point." Ethan kissed her temple, gentle and sweet. "For what it's worth, my life is also better than I imagined. I thought helping people escape would always be professional, meaningful, but distant. Then you walked into my office asking about catering and looking at me like I might be your only hope, and everything changed. I'm glad I changed it." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in crisis and chosen to build something lasting from that chaotic beginning. Clara knew there would be hard days ahead. Trauma didn't heal linearly. She'd have nightmares and panic attacks and moments when Victor's voice echoed in her head despite him being locked away forever. But she also knew she wouldn't face those moments alone. 5 years after walking away from her wedding to Victor Rinaldi, Clara Moreau stood in a very different venue preparing for a very different ceremony. This time she'd chosen everything: the intimate garden setting, the small group of close friends and family, the simple dress that made her feel like herself rather than someone's ornament. The Moreau Initiative had expanded to 6 cities. Clara directed the program while also completing her graduate degree in social work. She'd published a memoir that became a bestseller and used the proceeds to fund additional services for survivors. She'd testified before Congress about the intersection of organized crime and domestic violence. She'd become a voice for people who'd lost their own. But today wasn't about any of that. Today was about celebrating the marriage that had started as legal strategy and become the foundation of her life. Ethan waited at the altar, a simple arch of flowers in their own garden behind the brownstone they'd made into a real home. He wore a suit Clara had helped choose, and his eyes shone with emotion as she walked toward him on her father's arm for the second time. But this walk was different. No security team scanning for threats. No fear of the man waiting for her. Just joy and choice, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "We're already married," Ethan had said when Clara first proposed renewing their vows. "Legally, we're covered." "I know. But we got married in a lawyer's office with strangers as witnesses because I was desperate and terrified. I want to marry you again when I'm free and happy and choosing you for all the right reasons." So here they were, surrounded by everyone they loved, celebrating a marriage that had saved Claire's life and become Ethan's greatest joy. The ceremony was simple. They'd written their own vows, both wanting to speak their truth without traditional formulas dictating the words. Clara went first, her voice steady as she looked at the man who'd stood beside her through the worst and best moments of her life. "Ethan, You married me when I had nothing to offer except desperation and determination. You asked for nothing in return except the chance to help. You taught me that real partnership means supporting each other's autonomy, not controlling it. That real love means choosing someone every day, not claiming ownership. You saw me at my most broken and never tried to fix me. You just helped me find the tools to fix myself. I'm choosing you today, not because I need you to survive, but because I want you beside me while I live. I love you completely, freely, joyfully, and I promise to spend the rest of my life being the partner you deserve. Ethan's eyes were suspiciously bright as he began his own vows. Clara, the day you walked into my office and asked if I'd be willing to marry you, I thought I was helping you escape. I didn't realize you'd be saving me too. You taught me that the work I do isn't just about tactics and security. It's about human connection and trust and believing in people's capacity to transform their own lives. You survived something that would have destroyed most people, and you didn't just survive, you thrived. You built something beautiful from the wreckage. You chose yourself when it would have been easier to stay trapped. And then you chose me, which remains the greatest honor of my life. I promise to spend forever supporting your dreams, celebrating your strength, and loving you exactly as you are. They exchanged rings, new ones, chosen together, symbols of the marriage they'd built rather than the emergency measure it had started as. When the officiant pronounced them married, the kiss they shared was witnessed by everyone who mattered, a public declaration of private devotion. Rachel caught Clara afterward, pulling her into a tight embrace. You did it. You actually did it. Escaped the monster, brought down his empire, and found real love in the process. That's the best revenge possible. It's not revenge, Clara corrected gently. It's healing. Revenge would mean Victor still occupied space in my head. She gestured at the celebration around them, at Ethan talking with her father, at the friends and colleagues who'd supported her journey. This is me choosing to fill that space with joy instead. Her father appeared beside them, his eyes damp with emotion. Your mother would be so proud of you, sweetheart. Not just for surviving, but for building something meaningful from it, for refusing to let trauma define you. I had good examples, Clara said, squeezing his hand. You taught me that integrity matters more than convenience, that standing up for what's right is worth the cost. The reception stretched into evening, filled with laughter and stories and the kind of genuine celebration that comes from people who've weathered storms together. Clara danced with Ethan under string lights, feeling lighter and freer than she'd ever imagined possible. Happy? Ethan murmured against her hair. Completely. You? More than I knew how to be before you. Later, as guests departed and quiet settled over their home, Clara and Ethan stood in the garden where they'd just celebrated their vows. The city hummed around them, millions of lives unfolding in the darkness, but Clara felt cocooned in peace. What are you thinking? Ethan asked, pulling her close. That I made the right choice. Walking away from that wedding 5 years ago, fighting back against Victor, trusting you, building something meaningful from the wreckage. All of it. Every difficult, terrifying, necessary choice led me here. Led me to this moment, this life, this love. No regrets? Not a single one. Clara thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, desperate, trapped, planning an escape she wasn't sure would work. That woman had been brave beyond measure, but she'd also been broken in ways she hadn't fully understood yet. She'd needed saving, and she'd saved herself. The woman Clara was now had been built from those broken pieces. Stronger for having shattered and reassembled herself, wiser for having seen darkness and chosen light anyway, freer for having fought for every inch of autonomy and dignity she now possessed. Victor Rinaldi was still alive, still serving his life sentence in a federal prison. Clara rarely thought about him anymore. He'd lost his power the moment she'd walked away from that altar and chosen herself. Everything after that had just been confirmation of what she'd already known, that he couldn't own what had never belonged to him. I love you, Clara said, turning in Ethan's arms to face him properly. Thank you for marrying me, both times. Thank you for choosing me, both times. They kissed in the garden where they'd just renewed their vows, two people who'd found each other in crisis and built something lasting from chaos. And when they finally went inside, Leaving the string lights glowing behind them, Clara didn't look back. She'd spent too many years looking over her shoulder, scanning for threats, anticipating danger. Now she looked forward, toward the future she'd fought so hard to claim, toward the life she'd built on her own terms, toward the love she'd chosen freely. Victor had told her she belonged to him, that she'd always belonged to him. He'd been wrong. Clara Moreau belonged only to herself, and that made all the difference.